Chapter 295. Miss, who is that old grandpa? I've never seen him before. After hearing Rui's words and closing the door, the servant girl walked back and asked in confusion. After seeing her, the young master went back to his room without saying a word. His sullen look immediately made the servant girl have a bad impression of the old man. Rui rubbed her head and said, "The young master is thinking about something very important. Don't disturb him." "Oh." Xiao Huan replied in a low voice and quietly walked to the door. After taking a look inside, she tiptoed to the kitchen. It was getting late and it was time to cook dinner. Li Yi lay on the bed and stared blankly at the ceiling again. The difference was that this time, his mind was empty. As he stared, his eyelids became heavy, the north wind whimpered and the whole world was covered in white. "Dad, why do Li Dong and Li Bei all have grandpas? Where's my grandpa?" A young man in thin clothes stood in the courtyard and asked loudly in the heavy snow. The white snow fell on his head and shoulders. His lips were purple from the cold, but the determined expression on his face did not change at all. "You don't have a grandpa." After a long time, a hoarse voice came from the room with the flickering candlelight. "Why?" The young man shivered and his voice became louder. "I said no means no. Don't ask again." The voice in the room became stern. The young man bit his lips and his body began to tremble. He stubbornly stared at the candlelight in the room and refused to take a step forward. The snow became heavier and the wind blew on his face like knives. The young man's legs had lost all feeling. After a while, his body swayed and fell on the snow. At the same time, the door was pushed open and an anxious man ran out from the room. He picked up the young man on the snow and said hoarsely, The young man was unconscious and his forehead was burning. The man carried the young man into the room and quickly rushed out again. He wrapped the young man in a blanket and carried him on his back. He pushed open the courtyard door and disappeared into the snowstorm against the cold wind. "Doctor, my child is sick, please open the door. Doctor, please save my child. Doctor, please save my child." On the night of Chinese New Year's Eve, the pharmacy was closed and the clinic was closed. The man knocked on the door of several clinics with the child on his back, but no one answered. Finally, just as he was about to lose all hope, the door of the last clinic slowly opened. The white-haired old doctor glanced at him, sighed, and said, "Come in." When the young man woke up from his coma, he saw the man with bloodshot eyes and messy hair standing guard in front of the bed. "Father, I'm sorry. I should have been obedient," the young man said weakly. "It's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's all my fault." The man held the youth's hand, tears welling up in his eyes. "Father, I miss Mother." The man turned his head, unwilling to let the youth see the tears on his face. The young man suddenly smiled. He held his father's hand tightly and said, "Father, I won't ask that question again." The man couldn't help but cry out. Li Yi abruptly sat up from the bed, feeling a suffocating feeling in his heart. When a pure white handkerchief was extended to him, he realized that his face was already covered in tears without him noticing. Rui held one of his hands and used the other to wipe away his tears. Li Yi looked at the sky outside and asked, "What time is it now?" "It's almost midnight." Rui looked at him and asked, "Did you have a nightmare, husband?" "Midnight." Li Yi didn't expect that he would sleep for so long. The scenes that appeared in his dream, although trivial, were extremely real, as if he had experienced it himself. Perhaps it was really him who had experienced it himself. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the room. Li Yi rubbed his stomach. Rui smiled and said, "I didn't wake you up for lunch in the afternoon. I'll go and heat up the food now." Seeing Rui walk out of the room, Li Yi got off the bed, fetched a basin of ice water, and wiped his face carelessly. After being stimulated by the ice water, he immediately became much more awake. He let out a long sigh of relief. Just now, he seemed to have experienced another life. Everything in the dream was so clear. When he thought about it, those scenes would appear in his mind again. "It's you, right?" Li Yi murmured to the empty room. The room was eerily silent, and no one answered. The food should have been heated in the pot a long time ago. Rui went out for a while and came back again with a steaming tray in her hand. She said, "It's very late. You can't eat too much. Just have some porridge, husband." The rice was ordinary porridge, and the vegetables were pickled homemade pickles. Li Yi picked up the bowl and ate with relish. He felt that tonight's porridge and pickles were better than all the delicacies he had eaten before. The pickles were also pickled with a unique recipe, but the recipe was not found in the library. When he was a child, he would run all over the mountains with his friends after lunch in the afternoon. The amount of exercise was huge, so when he returned home at night, he would become hungry again. At this time, Grandma would cook some simple white porridge with pickled vegetables. When the rice was ready and the heat on the Kong bed was almost done, Grandma would quickly finish the meal and crawl into the warm quilt. He hadn't eaten for a whole day, so a bowl of porridge was naturally not enough. At this time, he didn't care about the rule that he couldn't eat too much at night. He took another bowl and soon saw the bottom of the bowl. "Husband, you can't eat anymore." When Li Yi reached out again, Rui stopped him in time. Although he felt that he could eat another bowl, Rui wouldn't let him, so Li Yi had to give up. Rui put the bowl and chopsticks back. When she came back again, Li Yi suddenly asked, "What do you think I should do?" Rui came over, smiled and said, "Husband, don't you already have the answer in your heart?" Hearing this, Li Yi was stunned for a moment, and then he also smiled. He raised his palm and looked at it, saying, "Well, I've received such a great favor from you, so I should help you dispel your obsession for so many years. After this, you can go in peace." "What are you talking about, husband?" Rui looked at him in confusion. Li Yi smiled and patted her hand, saying, "Nothing, nothing. Go to sleep. Women will become ugly if they stay up late." When he walked to the bedside, he saw that Rui was still standing in the same place, biting her lip and looking a little hesitant. This time, it was Li Yi's turn to be confused. He should be the one struggling. Why was she hesitating? What's wrong? He walked over and asked her. "Husband." Rui suddenly looked up at him. Li Yi looked into her eyes and waited for her to continue. "Let's consummate our marriage." The hesitation in her eyes quickly disappeared and turned into determination. Rui's voice came clearly. In Li Yi's mind, it was as if a bolt of lightning flashed, illuminating the whole world. At this moment, what Li family, what nobility, what young master, what going to the capital, all of you can go to hell. Chapter 296. Let's consummate our marriage. He had waited for this moment for a long time. At this moment, Li Yi had an urge to throw his head back and let out a long roar. Oh my God, she finally got over the hurdle in her heart. Li Yi abruptly carried the blushing Rui by her waist, and after spinning a few rounds on the spot, he went straight in the direction of the bed. Inside the room, the candlelight flickered. The two people on the bed had their foreheads against each other and their noses against each other. They could feel each other's breath. Li Yi could feel Rui's heartbeat speeding up. In fact, he wasn't much better. He had been a virgin for 2 lifetimes. Was he going to evolve into a real man tonight? Husband, just as Li Yi's hand started to reach for his belt, Rui suddenly whispered. I seem to have forgotten something. Her voice was so soft that it could not be heard. What is it? Li Yi asked subconsciously. His hand had already reached for his belt, but he was not in the mood to listen to what she said next. Was this the time to talk about other things at a critical moment? I think I had my period yesterday. Li Yi's hand stopped moving and his body froze. He slowly raised his head to look at her and asked in a trembling voice, "Are you serious?" Rui nodded. She buried her head in her chest and said, just now I forgot." When she said this, her voice was almost inaudible. It was not easy for her to muster the courage to take the last step, but she had forgotten the most important thing. Although she was still immature, Auntie Fong had already taught her about the matters between husband and wife after the wedding ceremony that day. When a woman was on her period, they could not consummate their marriage. She was already very thin-skinned, and after making such a big mistake, she no longer had the face to raise her head to look at Li Yi. "You can't play with me like this." Li Yi fell straight down, and all the hot blood in his body was instantly extinguished. The feeling of falling from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the valley was like riding a roller coaster. It was really King awesome. Husband. Seeing that there was no sound from beside her, Rui thought that he was angry, so she raised her head and spoke softly. Before the last syllable could come out, her lips were sealed. Li Yi held her face and kissed her fiercely. He picked up the quilt and walked out. "Husband, where are you going?" Rui asked hurriedly. "Sleep in the kitchen." Li Yi said angrily and walked out with the quilt in his arms. Tonight, it was better for him to calm down alone. Rui sat up from the bed and thought of what had just happened. Her face was so red that it looked like it was about to drip blood. His courage at that moment had long since disappeared without a trace. If he could turn back time, he probably wouldn't dare to say something like that again. "Miss. What happened to young master?" Xiaowan held her little quilt, rubbed her sleepy eyes, walked in from the door, and asked with a pout. She had been asleep for a long time, but was suddenly woken up by young master, who asked her to come to sleep with Miss, and then occupied her place. Closing the door, she walked to the bed and habitually climbed inside. She rolled the quilt into a tube and got in from the outside. She squinted at Rui and whispered, "Miss, you are so beautiful." After that, she slowly closed her eyes, and soon there was a sound of even breathing. Rui reached out to help her tuck the quilt, then bent her slender legs and leaned against the headboard, completely awake. She looked straight ahead, but her thoughts did not know where. The corners of her mouth occasionally raised a charming smile, and the blush rose from her neck to her ears. In the kitchen not far away, Li Yi also couldn't sleep. Of course, one reason was that he had slept well during the day. The other reason was that he was hit by the cruel reality after being teased halfway. This night was destined to be extremely long for him. When he was thinking about it, he suddenly realized a serious problem. Before the appearance of the old man from the capital, there seemed to be another voice in his body, which had never happened before. Was it because the appearance of the old man had aroused the deep obsession of the original owner of the body? If the boy's consciousness was still affecting this body, and if he had really consummated with Rui just now, wouldn't it be equivalent to a wretched guy hiding and peeping at them when they were having sex? Thinking of this, his heart instantly became uncomfortable. Bastard! He fiercely punched the wall. Not long after, there came the sound of a cold breath in the dark room. "Young master, did you sleep well last night? I'll cook 2 eggs for you." Xiao Huan was in the yard, watching Li Yi walk out of the kitchen with 2 panda eyes. She said doubtfully and took out 2 eggs from the storage room. Using boiled eggs to apply to the eyes could remove the dark circles. This was a special skill that the young master had taught her. Several of her close sisters used this method. When Li Yi was washing his face in the yard, Rui walked to the door. When she saw him, she couldn't help but blush and retreat. She dipped the willow branch in the green salt and cleaned her teeth. She suddenly spat out some mouthwash. The morning sun shone through the mist, forming a rainbow of colors. The old man's hateful face appeared on the other side of the rainbow. Young master. The old man with the surname wiped his face. He wasn't angry at all. This time, when he called Li Yi, he erased the word young from the front. The word young master was used to address the younger generation of the Li family. Although there was only one young master in his heart, he was used to calling him young master. After he returned, wouldn't he be demoted in front of the younger generation of the Li family? When do we leave? Li Yi looked at him and asked. A hint of joy appeared on the old man's face and he said, the sooner the better. Li Yi waved his hand and said, then let's wait for another 7 days. Rui, who had just walked out of the room, blushed again. The old man revealed a bitter expression and said, the journey is long and we don't know how long it will take. Young master, if we leave in 7 days, I'm afraid we won't be able to make it for the old madam's birthday. Li Yi cursed in his heart and turned to walk back to his room. These people really knew how to pick the right time. They didn't come early or late. They just had to pick this crucial time. Weren't they deliberately causing trouble? Young master, the eggs are ready. Come quickly. Xiao Huan came out of the kitchen with 2 boiled eggs in her hands. A moment later, Li Yi was lying on a rocking chair with the servant girl standing behind him. She held 2 eggs in her hands and rolled them in front of his eyes. In the courtyard, the old man and the young man called Li Zheng were talking in a low voice. The latter would occasionally turn his head to look at the sword-wielding woman standing in the courtyard with a trace of fear in his eyes. This time, even if he was given a lot of courage, he wouldn't dare to say the words, "Second madam," again. Chapter 297. Young master, time is of the essence. Let's leave tomorrow morning. After discussing with the young man for a while, Elderly walked over and said, "Tomorrow it is then." Li Yi waved his hand. Since he couldn't leave in a few days, it didn't matter if it was tomorrow or the day after. He had to leave early and come back early. He still had business to attend to. "Okay, we will come pick you up tomorrow morning." After saying this, the old man left with the young man. They packed early and left the next morning. If the journey was smooth, they should be able to reach the capital in 5 days. "Son-in-law, where are you going?" Xiao Huan lowered her head to look at Li Yi and asked in a small voice. Her tone was a bit nervous. Li Yi patted her little hand and said, "Don't worry, I am only going to the capital to take care of some business. I will be back soon. At that time, I will bring you rouge from the capital. Wanhua Zhai's rouge and face powder can only be sold in the capital." Last time, Li Xian gave a few boxes of high-quality rouge. It was said that it was specially provided by the palace and was very precious. Only the Wanhua Zhai in the capital sold it. The servant girl usually couldn't bear to use it and hid it in the cupboard. In the end, it was ruined by rats and she was sad for a long time. Li Yi originally wanted to ask Li Xian for a few more boxes. Later, he found out that there weren't many in the manor. The last few boxes were all given to him last time. Xiao Huan nodded with some disappointment. Although she had wanted the rouge from the Wanhua Zhai for a long time, she hoped that in a few days during the Lantern Festival, the son-in-law would take her and the miss to see the lanterns. However, the son-in-law would leave tomorrow. No matter how beautiful the lanterns were, it would be meaningless. Whether it was to repay a favor or to seek peace of mind, no matter what the reason was, this trip to the capital was unavoidable. Even if Li Yi planned to return immediately after the old foreign's birthday, it would probably take at least half a month. In the days that he would not be in Qing and Fu, there were some things that he had to explain before he left. The first thing he had to do was, of course, to ask for leave from the county government. This was simple. Speaking of which, the sick leave that Her Highness had given him had not disappeared. Now that he was working while sick, his salary was doubled. He only needed to inform County Magistrate Liu, and he would take care of the rest. County Magistrate Liu had nothing to say to this county lieutenant who hardly appeared in the county government. Of course, he would not put Li Yi in the same position as the former county commandant Zhou. Not to mention that their backgrounds were worlds apart, he could not find any fault with county commandant Zhou's contributions to the yamen. These days, under the instruction of the magistrate of Qing and prefecture, the county magistrate of Qing and prefecture had sent the county lieutenants to Anxi County, while the county magistrate of Anxi County had personally come to Anxi County to inspect the working style of the Anxi County government. Before he left, he intentionally left a few bailiffs to stay in the Anxi County government to learn about the reform. The good public security of Anxi County was widely publicized as an example. County Magistrate Liu had been an official for many years, but this was the first time he felt so proud. Li Yi walked out of the county government and went straight to the theater. He also had to inform Wan Ruoqing, an old man's son, that they had to stop the expansion of the theater for the time being. They had to manage the current territory first. If the foundation was not stable, there was a high chance that the theater would collapse in the future. Don't worry, sir. With our current manpower, running the few theaters in and out of the city is already our limit. There are many people who want to join us, but they are only doing odd jobs to earn a living. A few stewards are currently training their own people. When they are capable enough, they will be sent out. Old Sun's saliva flew everywhere. With a face full of excitement, he painted a grand blueprint for Li Yi with just a few words. It seemed that he wanted to open theaters in all the prefectures of the Jing kingdom in his lifetime. Everyone was busy. Even Wu Er, who had just joined the theater, was no exception. The eldest son of the Wu family continued his business of escorting goods and transporting goods. At the same time, he collected information from all walks of the martial arts world. Anecdotes about the martial arts world and the ranking of the best have been completely handed over to Wu Er. The few storytellers under him used the fastest speed to weave the martial arts world's matters into all sorts of stories. The ranking of the Wulin heroes changed 3 times a day. Its influence was no longer limited to Qing and prefecture. It was quite well known in the neighboring prefectures. Wan Ruoqing was still so beautiful and charming, but she had become a lot thinner. Li Yi frowned and said, "As for the theater, just let the people under you handle it. You just need to control the overall situation and avoid any big mistakes. Don't work too hard." Li Yi's original intention was to let them use their own abilities to change their poor lives. He didn't expect that the small brothel at the beginning would develop into such a huge organization. Wan Ruoqing's body was already weak. If she collapsed, it would not be worth it. Got it. Wan Ruoqing smiled and nodded. It was beyond her expectations that the theater could reach the scale it was today. Step by step, they had all put in a lot of effort for it. Naturally, they treasured it very much. They handled all the big and small things personally. More importantly, she really wanted to make some achievements and show him, that's right. Sister Ruoqing gets up before dawn every day and doesn't go to sleep after midnight. She has lost a lot of weight these days. The girl named Xiao Zhu said indignantly. Li Yi patted her on the shoulder and said, "From now on, you are Sister Ruoqing's personal butler. Your monthly salary is the same as the other butlers. The only thing you need to do is to look after her and not let her work too hard. Do you understand?" "Yes." The young girl's face flushed red as she patted her small chest and promised, "Don't worry, I will definitely raise Sister Ruoqing until she is fair and plump, just like before. No, she was too thin before, she has to be a little fatter." Li Yi smiled and then looked at them and said, "I have to go out for a period of time. If there is anything, you two can discuss it. If there is any trouble that you can't solve, go to the county government to find Arrestor Liu." When passing by the gate of the Jade Courtyard, Li Yi stopped for a moment. When he was hesitating whether to go in and say goodbye, the girl standing at the gate welcomed him with a smile. "Child, do you want to come in and have some fun, Looking at the girl talking and the white powder on her face falling down, Li no longer hesitated and strode away. He was only going out for half a month. There was no need to say goodbye. He had asked Xiaozue to send the things over. At most, when he came back, he would treat her to a meal and apologize in person. It should be sincere enough, right? When he stepped into the house, Rui was helping him pack up. There was a bulging bag on the table, and she was putting a few silver ingots into another small bag. These. Li pointed at the bag. Rui explained, they are all clothes to change. It is not convenient to use the silver notes. It is a long journey. Husband, bring more silver. It is old madam's birthday. You should buy some decent gifts. Don't be laughed at, by the way, it is inconvenient for me. Let Rui go to the capital with you. I don't know what will happen on the way. With Rui, she can protect you. Li Yi stood rooted to the spot in a daze as he watched her tidy up and ramble on. She was a peerless expert of her generation, yet she was behaving like a little lady. At this moment, the scene was really like a wife talking about her husband before he went away. It was also a feeling that Li Yi had never experienced in his 2 lives. The first time he saw the woman who smashed the wooden table with her palm and said, "I am Lu Rui," it was as if it was yesterday. He didn't know when she started to become more and more like a little wife. Chapter 298. You really don't want to go with me? Li Yi still wanted to fight for it. Now that the 2 of them had just broken through the last layer of window paper, it was time for them to be lovey-dovey and lovey-dovey. When they reached the capital and counted the days, it should be time. If he went with Rui, he wouldn't have to rush back so quickly. It was not easy to have a life with just the 2 of them. After arriving at the capital, they could go sightseeing and make up for their honeymoon. What a perfect plan. However, no matter how perfect the plan was, it couldn't win against his damn aunt. This was definitely one of the 2 words that men hated the most since ancient times. It didn't seem to be called like this in the modern times. In short, as long as it was a woman, even if she was an invincible martial arts master, when faced with this word, she would be defeated. Therefore, the target of the honeymoon became Mississippi Lu. Li Yi was suddenly filled with worry about this journey. Lu Rui smiled and said, "This journey is long and it's not convenient for me to go. You know, husband, the capital is not like Qing and prefecture. Rui is naughty and mischievous. Husband, keep an eye on her and don't let her get into any trouble." No one knew a younger sister better than an older sister. Li Yi felt that the one who understood Lu Rui the most was Rui. Just based on that sentence of "don't let her get into any trouble" instead of "don't let her be wronged or bullied," who's naughty and mischievous? When did I get into trouble? A dissatisfied voice came from outside. Lu Rui walked in with a frown. She was very dissatisfied with Rui's evaluation of her just now. No one said you're naughty and mischievous. Mississippi Lu is gentle and generous, virtuous and good at home. You're the model of all women in the world. That sentence made Mississippi Lu blush slightly. Just as she was about to draw her sword to thank Li Yi for his praise, Li Yi, who saw that the situation was not good, quickly slipped out. His voice came from outside the door. "We're leaving tomorrow morning. Remember to pack your luggage tonight." Putting aside her character of fighting at the slightest disagreement, second Miss Lu was really a must-have artifact for home travel. She could be admired from afar to cultivate one's mind, and she could also be used as a personal bodyguard. Along the way, it was inevitable that they would have to travel through mountains and rivers. If they encountered bandits, with their half-baked martial arts skills, they might not be able to handle them. As for the 2 old men, Li Yi had never placed his hopes on them. At the critical moment, his sister-in-law was still the most reliable. Seeing Xiao Huan sitting alone in the courtyard in a daze, he had long gotten used to her nagging. Suddenly realizing that he hadn't heard her voice for more than half a month, he still felt a little uncomfortable. He slowed down his footsteps and quietly approached her from behind. Suddenly, he reached out and covered her eyes. "Ah!" The servant girl let out a cry of surprise. After she came back to her senses, she removed Li Yi's hands and pouted in dissatisfaction. "Young master, you scared me again." She didn't need to look back to know who the person behind her was. The only person in the family who would play such a boring game with her was the young master. "Let's go." Li Yi rubbed her head and said. "Where are we going?" The servant girl raised her head and asked. "I'll take you out for a walk." Okay. "Young master, wait for me. I'll come out after I change my clothes." The servant girl hurriedly stood up and ran to the room as she spoke. "Sister, do you really want me to go to the capital with you?" In the room, Lu Rui looked at Rui and asked. "Why? You don't want to go?" Rui said as she packed her luggage, "Then let Uncle Fong go. Uncle Fong talked to me about this morning. He said that he had nothing to do at home and wanted to go to the capital to have a look. Since sister wants me to go, then I'll reluctantly agree to protect him." Lu Rui pursed his lips and made an expression that said, "I don't want to go. If it wasn't for you, I would never agree." He quickly slipped out of the room. "I'll go back to my room to pack." If she left late and her sister changed her mind and let Uncle Fong go, she wouldn't have a place to regret it. She was born here, grew up here, and had never left Qing and prefecture. She had long wanted to see the outside world. How could she give this opportunity to someone else? Early in the morning, he crawled out of his warm bed. When Rui brought a hot towel for him to wipe his face, she told him that the old man had been waiting outside for a while. Yesterday, he had accompanied Xiao Huan to shop until night time. Looking at the sky, it was getting late. He carelessly wiped his face and quickly put on his clothes. Walking out of the room, he was slightly stunned when he saw the situation in the courtyard. Including the old man and the young man he saw last time, there were 7 or 8 figures in the courtyard. They were dressed the same and looked familiar. "Young master, we should leave." The old man walked over and said with a smile. "There's no hurry. Let's leave after eating." Li Yi waved his hand. The old man could only nod in agreement. The meal before leaving was always especially sumptuous. When he invited the old man, he was rejected. He was not used to having so many people watching him eat together, so he sent them all out. During the meal, Rui gave many instructions. The young servant girl's face was full of reluctance. She didn't eat much of her favorite dishes. On the other hand, Mississippi Lu seemed to be in a good mood. She seemed to be looking forward to the trip this time. Li Yi felt that Rui told him to keep an eye on Rui and not let her get into trouble was not easy to achieve. The way this lady did things was never something he could control. He raised his head and said, "Why don't I go alone? Or, can I bring Fong?" Crack! The chopsticks in Mississippi Lu's hand broke into several pieces. She looked at Li Yi and her lips curled into a meaningful smile. "Ahem, forget it. Let's do as we said before." Li Yi buried his head in his meal and didn't mention what he had just said. "Young master, is the young madam not going back with us?" A rather luxurious carriage stopped outside the house. The Li old man looked at Li Yi and asked in confusion. Li Yi got on the carriage and said, "The madam is not well. I can go alone." "The madam is not well?" The old man was stunned for a moment. Then, a trace of joy appeared on his face. If that was the case, it was indeed not suitable for her to be tormented. After 1.5 years, he could bring both mother and son over. That would be a joyous occasion for the house. There were also 11 guards accompanying them. It was said that there should have been 14 guards, but because one of them was injured, 2 were left behind to take care of him. After a few days, they would return on their own. Lu Rui didn't sit in the carriage. She rode a horse and walked in front. Li Yi opened the curtain and waved goodbye to the people standing at the door. His line of sight was fixed on the door. He watched as the figure at the front of the carriage turned from clear to blurry. Beside her, there was a small figure waving his hand non-stop until the carriage turned a corner and he could no longer see it. Chapter 299. The carriage drove out of the city gate and headed east along the official road. The stable carriage gradually became bumpy. The so-called official road was actually just a slightly flat dirt road. It was far from the asphalt road or even cement road of the future. The carriage did not have any shock-absorbing properties. It was fine if the distance was short, but sitting in the carriage for a few hours was no different from riding a motorcycle on the village road of the future. Li Yi had not felt this kind of torture in a long time. He let out a long sigh. If it wasn't for this, he should be flying with Rui and going on a sweet honeymoon. They should be looking at the mountains, the water, the flowers, the stars, and the moon. He wouldn't be lying in the carriage alone, or the two of them. The curtain of the carriage was lifted, and fresh air with a light fragrance rushed in. Li Yi made some space for Mississippi Lu. Bored to death, he looked through the gap in the curtain and threw a broad bean into his mouth while looking at the road that kept going backwards. Although riding for a few hours was a piece of cake for Mississippi Lu, it had long lost its initial novelty. She was in a deadlock with Li Yi over the last few broad beans in the bag. Until Li Yi threw in a broad bean with his own saliva in exchange for a fierce eye roll from Mississippi Lu, he finally won. After a few hours of traveling, everyone must be tired. Why don't we rest for a while? Li Yi moved to the front of the carriage, lifted the curtain, and said to the people outside. Old Man Li stuck his head out from a smaller carriage in the back and said, "Young master, it's getting late. In less than an hour, we'll arrive at the next county. Once we get there, we'll first find an inn to stay at and then set off tomorrow morning." Li Yi nodded and climbed back into the carriage. He secretly rejoiced that the distance between Qing and Prefecture and the capital was not too far. 6 or 7 days, compared to a journey that could easily take months, was considered very short. However, thinking that this kind of jolting would continue for a week, he couldn't help but feel a headache. In the small courtyard, the sun was about to set. The young maidservant was lying on the rocking chair that Li Yi often rested on. She was counting something with her fingers. Half a month is 15 days. Son-in-law and second young mistress have been gone for half a day. In another 14.5 days, we will see them again, Xiao Huan. Rui's voice came from inside the house. Hearing her mistress's voice, the servant girl responded with a "aw." "Wash your hands and come back for dinner. I'll be back soon." She got up from the rocking chair and glanced out the door. When she saw Uncle Fong pass by, she turned around and walked back into the room listlessly. At the same time, Fong and a few other men had just walked out of the house. "Fong, are you sure they won't come back before midnight?" a man asked with uncertainty. "Don't worry." Fong patted his chest and said, "The women have gone to the temple to pray. They won't come back until after midnight. As long as we come back before midnight, there won't be any problems." "That's good. I heard that the competition for the courtesan belle these days will be very exciting. It's not easy to wait until my wife is not at home. This time, we have to take a good look." The few men laughed in tacit understanding. Once they were on the street, they immediately dispersed. "Hee, I'll go to Ing Chun House to have a look." "Fong, are you going to Jadeite Courtyard to see Miss Hong?" When only Fong and another man were left, the other man patted Fong's shoulder and left with a big smile. Old Fong cursed under his breath and walked in the opposite direction. At this time, in Jadeite Courtyard, the madam was hiding in the room, smiling happily. She was obviously in a good mood. It was a wise decision to invest all the resources on Chen Miao Miao. She was already a little famous, and in the past few days, she had earned a lot of attention. In addition, she had also worked hard to win the support of many young masters. Her popularity was comparable to those veteran courtesans. This year, she might be able to get one of the top 10 courtesans. The only pity was that drunken Mo seemed to be possessed by something. No matter what she said, she was not willing to compete for the position of courtesan belle. If she had such a thought, her ranking would definitely be higher than Chen Miao Miao's. She had been in this industry for a lifetime, and had seen all kinds of temperaments. Someone like drunken Mo would suffer sooner or later. If she didn't take advantage of her young years to work hard and plan for the future, she might be able to end up in a good family. Someone like her who acted recklessly would most likely end up in a miserable end. There was a knock on the door. The madam withdrew her thoughts and opened the door. Seeing who it was, she asked, "Drunken Mo, what's the matter?" If it was in the past, the madam would naturally not be so cold to the star of Jadeite Courtyard, her money tree. But now, the money tree had changed hands, so she naturally did not need to be so enthusiastic. "Mother, aren't you going to invite me in?" Tsing Zumo seemed to be completely unaware of this and still said with a smile. "I say, drunken Mo, listen to mother's advice. This will only destroy you in the end. Even if you don't think for mother, you have to think for yourself. If this goes on, mother really can't help you." No matter what, it was a relationship of many years, and the madam still did not give up trying to persuade her. Tsing Zumo smiled and said, "That's why I came this time." "You've thought it through." The madam's eyes lit up. "Yes." Tsing Zumo nodded and said, "I'm here to redeem myself." "Where did you get so much money?" Looking at the stack of banknotes in her hand, the madam asked in shock after verifying their authenticity. The banknotes were real. As long as she went to the corresponding bank, she could exchange them for the equivalent amount of silver. The problem was, where did she get so much money? This money should be enough, right? Tsing Zumo looked at her and asked. "Enough." The madam nodded mechanically. According to the reputation, everyone in the Jadeite courtyard had a clear price for their redemption. No matter who it was, as long as they had enough money, she would let them go. Of course, she would not easily let go of drunken Mo in the past. But now, her reputation was not as good as before. After the top beauty competition, she was afraid that her reputation would drop a lot, and the money needed to redeem herself would naturally be less, at least far less than what she had in her hands. She was a little hesitant at this moment. What if drunken Mo? As soon as this idea came up, she rejected it. It was a foregone conclusion that Chen Miao Miao would replace her as the new face of Jadeite Courtyard. There would be no more changes. Drunken Mo's usefulness to her was actually dispensable. It was better to accept the silver and do her a favor. "Have you really thought it through?" The madam looked at her and asked seriously. Obviously, she had made her choice at this time. After getting Tsing Zumo's confirmation, the madam sighed and took out her contract from the box in the room. She said, "For the sake of our past friendship, if you want to leave, wait until after the courtesan competition." Although her fame was not as good as before, she was still stronger than most people. At this critical time, there was no harm in gaining more popularity for Jadeite Courtyard. Okay. It was just a few days later. She had waited for so many years. A few more days was nothing. Moreover, the contract was in her hands. The moment she got it, she was already free. When she walked out of the madam's room, Tsing Zumo felt unprecedentedly relaxed. She finally unloaded the mountain that had been pressing on her shoulders for a long time. She let out a long sigh of relief and walked all the way back to her room. It was as if she did not see the various complicated looks from her sisters in the past. She ignored Chen Miao Miao's gloating look. She pushed open the door and walked in. She saw Xiao Chui sitting by the bed with a sad face. This silly girl, she murmured. She had wanted to give her a surprise, but since she had promised her mother to keep it a secret, she could only tell her the news after the courtesan competition. Chapter 300. Miss, do you still want to paint today? Xiao Chui hurriedly stood up and asked. During the courtesan competition, everyone else was busy earning popularity to increase their chances. Only her young miss was not worried at all. She buried herself in painting all day as if she could never finish. Moreover, the paintings that she took with her every time she left never appeared again. I'm not painting anymore. Help me prepare the bath water. We're going out in a bit. Xing Zumo shook her head. She had already raised enough money to redeem herself, so there was no need to sell her paintings anymore. Moreover, the rarer something was, the greater its value. The few 3D paintings that occasionally appeared could be sold for a good price. If there were too many of them, it wouldn't be so easy to rely on selling paintings to make money in the future when they lacked money. Watching the young miss enter the inner room, Xiao Chui touched something in her bosom. Only then did her anxious heart calm down. This time, she would be the one to protect her young miss. Xiao Chui. Just as she was in a trance, she heard a voice coming from the inner room. The young girl immediately stood up and responded, jogging over. Mianxiu Garden was filled with fake mountains and waterside pavilions. It was a rare place of elegance. Anyone with a bit of status in the city would all treat this place as the first choice for inviting guests to a banquet. Especially in recent days, the garden was brightly lit almost every night. Tonight was no exception. The famous young master of a wealthy merchant in Qing and Prefecture, Zhu Qing, was the host. Those invited included wealthy young masters of merchants, as well as many famous scholars of Qing and Prefecture. With the scholars, there was naturally no lack of beauties. Any courtesan with a bit of fame also received an invitation. Of course, it was not certain if they would come. After all, Zhu Qing had promoted Lu Yi this year, and he had spared no effort. He could be considered as their competitor. Naturally, some people would not come, but with young Master Zhu's reputation, many people would still give him face. Thank you, young Master Zhu, for everything you've done for Yi. Yi is very grateful. In one of the pavilions, a tall green-clothed woman bowed to the young man opposite her. Ah, Yi, what are you saying? Helping you is helping me. There's no need to be so distant between us. The young man smiled and waved his hand, saying nonchalantly. At this moment, many people were looking at the pavilion. Of the two people in the pavilion, one was a wealthy young master, and the other was one of the most famous courtesans in Qing and Prefecture. This banquet was obviously held for her. When it came to the level of the top 10 courtesans, it was actually very difficult to distinguish who was superior in terms of beauty or talent. If they really used these to rank them, no one would be convinced. Every year, the top beauty competition was not only a contest between them, but also a contest between the powers behind them. This year's situation, with Zhu Qing as the leader, the young masters of the wealthy merchants mostly stood behind Lu Yi, and behind Lu Qiao stood the many scholars of Qing and Prefecture. The others naturally also had their own supporters, but compared to these two people, they were still somewhat lacking. The battle for the championship would most likely be the battle between Lu Qiao and Lu Yi. In a while, there will be a few friends coming. They are scholars from the capital, I'll introduce you to them. Zhu Qing smiled. Miss Lu has the support of the scholars led by Yang Yanzhou. In terms of poetry, we are already at a disadvantage. In a while, you must take advantage of the opportunity. If you can make them sincerely help you, this time, we will have more than a 70% chance of taking the championship. Lu Yi nodded, then said with some pity, it's a pity that we didn't win over that mysteriously. If we had his help, the many scholars of Qing would not be a problem. Although Zhu Qing was a merchant, he had clearly heard of the Li that Lu Yi spoke of. Hearing this, he said, "Don't worry, although the invitation we sent out was like a rock in the ocean, and the silver was returned, I heard that he did not participate in anyone's banquet. I'm afraid he doesn't have much interest in these things. Just keep an eye on Yang Yanzhou and the others." Just as he finished speaking, he saw Lu Yi look in front of her and say in surprise, "Why are they here?" Zhu Qing followed her line of sight and saw a few figures walking over from afar. "That's Yang Yanzhou, Wan Qiliang, and Miss Lu. Why are they?" A look of surprise also appeared on Zhu Qing's face. Although he had sent out invitations to these people, he had never thought that they would come. After all, Yi was Miss Lu's greatest rival. Why would they come to such an occasion? Although he was surprised, everyone had a legitimate competitive relationship. The necessary etiquette was still needed. It was precisely because the two of them were the greatest rivals that they had to give each other even more respect. "Brother Yang, Brother Wan, I didn't think that you would come, sorry for not going out to meet you." Zhu Qing walked over and said with cupped hands. "Sister Lu." Lu Qiao had become famous earlier than her, so Lu Yi took the initiative to greet her. No matter how intense the competition was in the dark, it could not be seen at all on the surface. The crowd only saw Zhu Qing, Yang Yanzhou, and the others laughing and chatting along the way. Lu Qiao and Lu Yi, the two popular courtesan candidates, held hands and were as close as sisters. "I still have a few friends over there that I need to greet. I am truly sorry for neglecting Brother Yang." After some polite small talk, Zhu Qing and Lu Yi went somewhere else. Yang Yanzhou and the others could not have come to cause trouble, so they let them be. How was it? Looking at Lu Yi's departing figure, the young man beside Yang Yanzhou turned his head and asked, "You live up to your reputation?" Yang Yanzhou nodded and said, "To be able to receive such praise from the number one of Qing and Prefecture, the former number one scholar of Qing and Prefecture, was already very impressive." Wan Qiliang smiled and said, "It looks like it won't be so easy for Miss Yi to win first place." Lu Qiao said with a smile, "Do your best and leave it to fate. If Sister Yi wins the final courtesan title, Qiao can only congratulate you." Wan Qiliang laughed and said, "Miss Qiao, don't worry. Brother Yanzhou's chest is full of ink. Just a little bit will be enough to help you in first place. The title of number one scholar of Qing and Prefecture is not an undeserved reputation." Yang Yanzhou's expression was bitter as he said, "Qiliang, please don't say anything about being the number one scholar of Qing and Prefecture. Aren't you making fun of me?" Wan Qiliang also finally realized that he had made a mistake just now. No matter how famous Yang Yanzhou was, as long as that person was around, the title of number one scholar would never fall to him. Then, he realized another problem and said, "I wonder which girl that person is supporting." If Yang Yanzhou continued, "I had originally thought that he would support the top artist of the Jade's Yard, Lady Zuamo, but that Lady Zuamo does not seem to have any interest in this competition. It is said that she only studies painting in her room every day. You may not know, but one of Lady Zuamo's paintings is in high demand. A few days ago, I spent 200 taels of silver to buy one." Wan Qiliang nodded and said, "It is also fortunate that she has no intention of competing for the title of courtesan. Otherwise, she would throw out a few more frightening poems and the competition would be meaningless." Lu Qiao also secretly rejoiced in her heart. Although she did not have any relationship with that person, everyone was the same. This time, the competition would still be fair. As she thought this, she raised her head and inadvertently glanced around. Two figures who had just walked in appeared in her line of sight. Chapter 301. It's her. Lu Qiao was startled. Because of the competition for courtesan belle, she naturally knew the famous peers in Qing and Prefecture. She even had a general understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. In fact, everyone had a copy of such information in their hands. Therefore, she had always been very concerned about Tsingzumo, a very threatening opponent. This kind of attention, after learning that she did not attend any banquets and did not seem to have any intention of competing for the title of courtesan belle, gradually decreased, and all their energy was focused on Lu Yi. However, they still did not dare to underestimate her, because they all knew very well that the other party was the most unstable factor in this courtesan belle competition. Therefore, seeing Tsingzumo on such an occasion tonight, Lu Xiaoqiao would naturally think more. Could it be that she had changed her mind and decided to fight again in these last days? Having missed the best time, this hope was very slim, unless Lu Xiaoqiao was not the only one who had this idea. Lu Yi also did not expect that Tsingzumo, who never attended such banquets, would actually come tonight. After greeting her and saying a few words, she felt uneasy for no reason. After Lu Yi left, Tsingzumo looked around and found that all the quiet places in the garden were occupied. She could only pull Xiao Chui to a relatively quiet table, planning to sit for a while and then leave. This would be considered as completing the task given to her by the procuress. Over there, looks like Miss Zumo. Doesn't she never attend such occasions? How could it be? It really is her. I haven't seen Miss Zumo for a long time. It's said that she has no intention of competing for courtesan belle. Could the rumors be wrong? However, even if she wants to compete, it's too late, isn't it? Although Tsingzumo rarely appeared in front of people these days, the popularity she had accumulated would not fade so easily. On the contrary, because of the recent silence, there were more people paying attention to her tonight. I didn't expect Miss Zumo to come too. Looking from afar, a trace of surprise appeared on Yang Yanzhou's face. Wan Qiliang cared about other things and said, just in time. After hearing what Yanzhou said just now, I also want to buy a painting from Miss Zumo. I wonder if she will give me face and give me a discount of a few dozen taels of silver. After all, I am not as rich as brother Yanzhou. As they chatted and laughed, they walked over. Tsingzumo naturally didn't know what the people in the distance were thinking. Looking at Xiao Chui, who was still frowning, she finally couldn't bear to let her worry, so she whispered a few words in her ear. Ah! Xiao Chui was startled. Then, a look of joy appeared on her face. Miss, is what you said true? In the future, lower your voice. Tsingzumo gestured for her to keep quiet. This news couldn't be announced yet. I got it. The worry on Xiao Chui's face disappeared. Since her mistress had already redeemed herself, what was the point of competing for the title of top courtesan? Wherever her mistress went, she would go. She wouldn't have to be afraid anymore. She suddenly thought of something and said, by the way, Miss, Xiao Chui has something to give you. Although the young miss no longer needed that thing, Xiao Chui still planned to give it to her. As for whether the young miss wanted to keep it or let her return it, it was up to the young miss. What is it? While Tsingzumo was confused, she saw that after Xiao Chui searched around in her arms, her face changed, and she immediately became flustered. Oh no, miss, I lost that thing. Xiao Chui stood up in a panic. Just as she was about to search along the path she came from, she suddenly saw a thin booklet lying a few steps away. She let out a long sigh of relief. Just as she was about to run over and pick it up, a pair of slender hands appeared in her line of sight. Seeing a woman pick up the booklet, Xiao Chui quickly ran over and said, I just dropped it. Oh, just because you say it's yours, it's yours. Do you have any proof? The woman glanced at Xiao Chui and flipped it open. Give it back. Xiao Chui was about to reach out and grab it, but she was pushed by the maid next to the woman. She took a few steps back and almost fell. Whose maid is this? She's so unruly. The maid glared at Xiao Chui and stood in front of the woman. The woman naturally recognized that the young girl in front of her was the maid of Xing Zumo, the top artist of the jadeite courtyard. Otherwise, with her status, she wouldn't bother with a little maid. But who told her to be Xing Zumo's maid? Last year, during the top courtesan selection, a certain young master who had always favored her turned to support Xing Zumo at the last moment, causing her to lose the top courtesan selection. In this line of work, stealing a person's job was like killing their parents. She still remembered this hatred to this day. Every dog has its day. This year, her top courtesan selection was already in the bag, but the other party. The woman sneered in her heart. Did she still have a chance to turn the tables? Opening the booklet in her hand, the sneer on her face became even more intense. Did she think she could turn the tables with a few lousy poems? She casually recited the poem on the first page. There is a beauty in the north, peerless and independent. One glance can topple a city, and another can topple a country. Better not know how to topple a city or a country, a beauty is hard to find. After reciting the poem, the sneer on her face disappeared. She felt some regret in her heart. Even if a renowned courtesan didn't have attainments in poetry, how could they not have the ability to appreciate beauty? This poem describing a beauty, although the style was irregular, there were no flowery words, no detailed descriptions, and the language was simple and monotonous, but why did the image of a beauty that could topple a country appear in her mind? May I ask Miss Hu, can I take a look at this poem? A voice came from behind her. Yang Yanzhou walked over with large strides and looked at her as he asked. Young Master Yang. Hu Ning looked at Yang Yanzhou and didn't know what to say. She had just picked up this booklet from the ground, how would she know who wrote this poem? Miss Hu, can I take a look at this item? Yang Yanzhou once again pointed at the booklet in her hand and asked. Hu Ning nodded her head in a daze and handed over the booklet in her hand. Yang Yanzhou was the head of the scholars in Qingham Prefecture, he wasn't someone she could offend. Song of a Beauty. I didn't think that there would still be someone who could write a folk song poem of this level. I wonder who the scholar who wrote this poem is. Can you introduce me to him? Yang Yanzhou's face showed an expression of admiration as he looked at Hu Ning and asked. This poem was written for our family's mistress. Following the arrival of Yang Yanzhou and Lu Qiao, the crowd gradually gathered towards them. Xiao Chui's voice was blocked out by the crowd. Hu Ning's expression changed a few times before she suddenly smiled and said, to tell you the truth, this poem was given to Ning by a young master. That young master specifically told me not to reveal his identity. I hope young Master Yang doesn't take offense. Her face carried just the right amount of apology, as if there really was something that was difficult to say. Anyone who saw this would not have any thoughts of blaming her. This song of a beauty was completely different from those obscene lyrics in songs. There wasn't a single word of description in the entire poem, and it left one's imagination running wild. Even as a woman, Hu Ning couldn't wait to meet the beauty in the poem. If this poem could be publicized by Yang Yanzhou, it would greatly increase her reputation. Xing Zumo, I'll reluctantly accept this gift. Hu Ning muttered inwardly, and the smile on her face became even more radiant. Devastatingly beautiful. How beautiful must this woman be? Even the legendary beauty Bao Si can't be compared to her. She only listened to a few lines of the poem, yet she's so eager to meet the beauty in the poem. In the next few days, I'm afraid the Golden Phoenix Pavilion's door will be trampled to pieces. Miss Ning's title of courtesan belle is in the bag. If the Golden Phoenix Pavilion invests more resources, she might even be able to fight for the title of courtesan belle. Hu Ning's heart was blooming with joy as she listened to the crowd's discussions. Tonight's surprise was simply too big for her. At this time, Yang Yanzhou flipped to a page, and in the next moment, a puzzled voice sounded in her ears. The clouds think of her clothes, the flowers think of her face, the spring breeze caresses the balustrade with dew. If we don't meet in the jadeite courtyard, we will meet under the moonlight on the Yaotai pavilion. May I know when Miss Ning are transferred to the jadeite courtyard from the Golden Phoenix pavilion? Jadeite courtyard. Hu Ning er's expression froze. Chapter 302. Miss Ning transferred to the jadeite courtyard. I've never heard of this. I just saw her at the Golden Phoenix pavilion yesterday. Then what does this line, if not in the jadeite courtyard, we will meet under the moonlight at the jade pavilion, mean? Could it be that this poem isn't written for Miss Ning er? Hearing Yang Yanzhou recite another poem, the crowd was stunned for a moment before they started to discuss among themselves. These famous courtesans didn't have to stay in the same place for the rest of their lives. It was common for them to transfer to another brothel, but this would only happen to slightly famous courtesans like the top 10 courtesans. Unless the brothel keeper was a fool, she wouldn't let go of such a cash cow. Obviously, Hu Ning was the Golden Phoenix Pavilion's brothel keeper's cash cow, and the possibility of her transferring to another brothel was minuscule. With this, the crowd couldn't help but think of another possibility. Could it be that this poem wasn't written for her? If that was the case, then the song of a beauty that stunned the crowd just now wasn't written for her, right? Thinking about it, although Hu Ning could be considered beautiful, it was too much of an exaggeration to say that she was devastatingly beautiful. Even she herself wouldn't dare to admit it. As for the second poem, the rosy clouds are her clothes, the flowers are her face, the spring breeze caresses the railings, the dewdrops moisten the flowers, making them more vibrant. Such a beauty, if not in the jadeite courtyard, we will meet under the moonlight at the jade pavilion. This was also a poem praising a beauty. Compared to it, the soft waist and soft limbs, skillful in singing and dancing, that had been spreading like wildfire these days could only be considered as obscene lyrics. The previous beauty song and the poem just now were definitely a rare masterpiece. It was unknown which great talent had written them. Some people even felt that it was a great waste to use such a poem on a few courtesans in a brothel. If not in the jadeite courtyard, the jadeite courtyard. Finally, someone came back to his senses and murmured, "These two poems are both about a girl in the jade courtyard. Could it be Chen Miao Miao who has been in the limelight recently?" In the crowd, Chen Miao Miao's face was blushing. She didn't dare to admit that these two poems were written for her even if she had 10 guts. She knew herself. If she was really like what was written in the poems, how could the title of the top artist in the Jade's courtyard fall on Zhang Zimo's head? After a familiar figure appeared in her mind, Chen Miao Miao finally understood. Of course, there was no lack of people in the crowd who understood the situation. After a short moment of commotion, the place suddenly fell silent again. Everyone turned their gazes and looked at the woman who was not far away. The woman was comforting the servant girl who was on the verge of tears. From afar, she heard the servant girl say, "Miss," she snatched the poem that Lili gave you, Lili. In the circle of scholars in Qing and Fu, whenever these 3 words were mentioned, their hearts would tremble. As a result, those with the surname Li did not dare to let outsiders call them young master. Since it was that person, then all of this could be explained. Thinking of the rumors between him and Lady Zimo, everyone immediately understood. Yang Yanzhou held the thin book in his hand. From time to time, voices could be heard. There is a beautiful person, like a clear breeze. Adding 1 point is too long, subtracting 1 point is too short. Her form, like a graceful swan, like a swimming dragon. Wan Qiliang stood beside Yang Yanzhou in a daze and murmured, "Bullying, this is too much." Every single one of them could be used as the finale. Enough for an outdated courtesan to make a comeback. Yet, they were tossed out so casually, and there were so many of them at once. In this way, how could Lu Qiao and Lu Yi fight for first place? Hu Ning's face was pale, and she almost lost her footing. She forced a smile and said, I was just joking just now. These poems were naturally not written for Ning. I picked it up on the ground just now. I'm afraid someone lost it. Yang Yanzhou and Wan Qiliang only had eyes for the book and did not pay attention to Hu Ning at all. The latter moved her gaze away from the book and exclaimed, to think that someone could reach the pinnacle of folk song poems, songs of Chu, and poetry. I'm afraid we will not be able to catch up even if we spend our entire lives. Suddenly, he asked in confusion, Luo Shenfu, it compares the woman one admires to a goddess. The words are beautiful but not impetuous, and the portrayal is already at the pinnacle. It is fascinating. But where is this Luo River? I've never heard of it before. Could it be made up? Yang Yanzhou's gaze did not move away from the book. He said, Luo River is the ancient name of Yuan River. Last night, you and I were boating on Yuan River. Moreover, the name Luo Shen is commonly seen in ancient books. How could it be made up? Wan Qiliang naturally knew that his knowledge was far from Yang Yanzhou's. If he said there was, then there must be. It's him, it can only be him. Yang Yanzhou murmured. A hint of unwillingness appeared on his face, but he then shook his head with a wry smile. He had already given up on the idea of comparing himself to him in this life. At this time, the crowd slowly parted to form a path. Xing Zumo and Xiao Chui walked over. Yang Yanzhou walked over and said, Miss Zumo, I have a request. Can I make a copy of the poem book in my hand? In fact, even now, Xing Zumo did not know what was written in the book. She was also very confused. When did Li Yi give this to her? Why didn't Xiao Chui tell her? Also, why was Hu Ning's face so pale? Why were these people looking at her like that? All the mysteries were contained in the thin book that Yang Yanzhou handed over. She took the book and flipped it open. 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages. As the former top courtesan, her attainments in poetry were naturally not bad. Gradually, her pretty face began to blush inexplicably. Were these poems all talking about her? Was she really that good? Looking at those extremely extravagant descriptions, she could not help but think of the scene that night. She only felt that even the roots of her ears were beginning to burn. Outside the crowd, after Zhu Qing came back to her senses, she turned to the few young people beside her and asked, How is it? Are you confident? Confident. Those poems have already praised that woman to the heavens. Among all the scholars in the Jing kingdom, who would dare say the word confident? The leading young man shook his head. This was already beyond the scope of their competition. It was better to save some face. In the field, Lu Qiao and Lu Yi looked at each other and saw the deep helplessness in each other's eyes. The two of them had fought for so long, but in the end, it was still like drawing water with a sieve. And the few people who had hopes of becoming the top courtesan, including Chen Miao, all looked at Hu Ning with incomparably fierce eyes, as if they wanted to skin her alive. They did not want to compete for the top courtesan anymore. Damn Hu Ning, why did she have to recite poems for no reason? Sensing their malice, Hu Ning's face became even paler. She had probably become everyone's public enemy. Chapter 303. Stupid girl, why didn't you tell me such an important thing earlier? As soon as the two returned to the jade courtyard and closed the door, Xing Zumo slapped Xiao Chui's butt hard. Xiao Chui covered her butt and said pitifully, I was worried that Miss wouldn't agree. She secretly stuck out her tongue and didn't care at all. Who asked them to gossip all day long? This time, she finally shut everyone's mouth. Don't make your own decisions in the future. Xing Zumo glared at her angrily. At this moment, she secretly rejoiced in her heart. Fortunately, she had redeemed her freedom before this. If it had been a few hours later, her mother wouldn't have agreed to let her leave. "Miss, what should we do now?" Xiao Chui rubbed her butt and asked. "What else can we do?" Xing Zimo glared at her and said, "Hurry up and pack up. We'll leave from the back door." "Where to?" Xiao Chui asked doubtfully. "Let's get out of here first." Xing Zimo replied and began to pack up. She was entangled by those people and didn't rush back until the end of the banquet. She had to leave as soon as possible. Otherwise, when tonight's event spread, she wouldn't be able to leave even if she wanted to. During the top beauty competition, such information was extremely sensitive. A certain scholar offered a poem to the top girl, a certain young man spent a lot of money to win a beauty smile. The news spread so fast that it was hard to imagine. Within an hour, even a notice might be posted. Seeing Xiao Chui carry out a big box, Xing Zimo said grumpily, "Pick something valuable. Don't bring anything worthless. Remember, don't forget your secret stash of money hidden under the bed." At this time, in a certain room in the attic, the madam of the Jade Courtyard was counting her little treasury. Each piece of jewelry shone with a charming radiance under the light. She counted and wiped the silver, and the smile on her old face never stopped. When Miao Miao won the title of top beauty, the future wealth would come rolling in. "Mom, Mom." Suddenly, an anxious voice came from outside the door. The madam's expression changed. She hurriedly covered the things on the bed with a blanket and walked over to open the door. She frowned and asked, "Why are you panicking? Have you forgotten the rules I taught you?" "Mom, there are a lot of people at the entrance of our Jade Courtyard," the woman outside said breathlessly. "Many people." The madam locked the door from the outside and followed her downstairs. From afar, she could hear a commotion outside the door. A few servants blocked the door from the inside, and a series of knocking sounds came from the outside. "Are these people Miao Miao's admirers?" the madam murmured. She could only think of this possibility. She strode over and said, "Hurry up and open the door. We're doing business. How can we lock our customers outside?" He kicked the legs of the servants a few times and opened the door. After taking a look outside, he immediately closed the door and hurriedly said, Quickly close the door, don't let them in." Seeing the dense crowd outside, the brothel keeper's face turned pale. How could this be considered a customer? If so many people rushed in at once, it would be more than enough to tear down the Jadeite courtyard. Voila! Everyone was originally crowded at the door. Seeing the closed door suddenly open, how could they let it be closed again? With a crash, they all rushed inside. Before they rushed in, the brothel keeper had already scrambled up the stairs. Her forehead was covered in cold sweat. Were these people really here to tear down the Jadeite courtyard? Where were the officials? Why hadn't the damn officials come yet? As if hearing the call of the brothel keeper, a sudden shout came from outside the door. More than 10 bailiffs all unsheathed their weapons and blocked more people outside. Lu Yi walked in with his waist saber in hand. He frowned and asked, "What's going on? Why are they all here?" Ever since he heard from his subordinates that there were hundreds of people blocking the entrance of the Jadeite courtyard, Lu Yi hurried over, thinking that there was a riot. He even sent someone to inform the soldiers stationed in the city. However, when he came here, he found that things didn't seem to be what he thought. "I heard that Miss Zue Mo of the Jadeite courtyard is devastatingly beautiful. She is a rare beauty in the world. Madam, why don't you invite her out and let us have a look?" Someone in the crowd said loudly. Immediately, the majority of the people in the crowd agreed with him. "We came here because of her reputation. We want to see what the Jade Pool Fairy looks like." "Nonsense, she is obviously the Luo Shui Fairy. If there really is such a wonderful person in the world, of course we have to see her." The bailiffs' faces were filled with astonishment. Motherf **Ker. So many people had made such a scene just to see a woman. My lord is really clever. He even predicted this kind of thing. Thinking of what the county commandant said to him before he left, Louis's heart suddenly had more respect for him. Zuamo. Jade Pool Fairy, Luo Shui Fairy. The brothel keeper of the jadeite courtyard, who didn't know what happened, looked confused. She was the one who asked Zuamo to attend the banquet tonight. Could it be that something happened at the banquet? Go and ask Zuamo to come out. Now was not the time to be curious. The brothel keeper hurriedly ordered a servant. If Zuamo didn't come out, the jadeite courtyard might really be destroyed by them. The servant hurriedly ran to the backyard. After a while, he ran back with a pale face and said in a trembling voice, "Miss Zuamo. Gone, gone. Gone." The brothel keeper murmured. Seeing that the people below had gradually retreated from the hall under the persuasion of the officials, she couldn't help but feel a little relieved. Zuamo had already redeemed herself. She could leave whenever she wanted. The first thing now was to figure out what happened. If these people came every day, how could they do business? Seeing Chen Miao Miao coming in from outside, the brothel keeper hurriedly greeted her. After a while, after Chen Miao Miao told the cause and effect of the matter, the brothel keeper looked dull, her old face was pale, and her legs were weak. She held on to the wall to barely stand. In other words, they really just wanted to see Zuamo. Someone wrote more than 10 excellent poems for Zuamo. If she goes to compete for the top spot now, the probability of success is more than 50%. The brothel keeper closed her eyes and murmured, "Just now, she used 1,000 taels to redeem herself. Oh my God, what sin have I committed?" She seemed to see a huge mountain of gold gradually leaving her. She wanted to use a knife to cut off a piece of her heart. She was filled with regret and then, she fainted. Zuamo redeemed herself. Hearing this news, Chen Miao Miao's face immediately filled with ecstasy. Since she no longer belonged to this line of work, no matter how famous she was, she had no right to compete for the top courtesan. On the contrary, because of her, the jadeite courtyard became more famous. Perhaps, she could also benefit a little. Tonight, the jadeite courtyard was destined to be the liveliest place in Qing and Prefecture. No one knew that just as the gate of the jadeite courtyard was blocked so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through, two handsome young masters carrying bags walked out from the back door of the jadeite courtyard. They went around to the front door and swaggered past the crowd. Chapter 304. It's been 6 days. Xiao Huan sat in the yard and habitually counted her fingers and muttered to herself. Son-in-law and second miss have been walking for 6 days. They should be arriving in the capital soon. Yesterday, the lantern festival had passed. Miss took her to the street to see the lanterns. When they came back, they bought a few beautiful lanterns to hang in the room. If son-in-law was here, he wouldn't have to spend money to buy them. The person who sold the lanterns said that as long as he guessed the riddles, he could take the lanterns back. Son-in-law was very good at guessing riddles. He would definitely lose money. There was some noise outside. She heard it in the yard just now. It seemed that Uncle Fong and the others went to the brothel yesterday when Aunt was not at home. When they came out, they were caught on the spot by the aunties who came back from the temple. Last night, the house was noisy all night. Early in the morning, they could see the brooms raised high in the yard next door. A figure suddenly jumped in from the door. Fong made a shushing gesture to Xiao Huan and whispered, "I'll hide here. Don't tell your aunt." As he spoke, he quickly flashed into the storage room. Xiao Huan sighed. Uncle Fong was such an honest person. Why did he like to go to such an unscrupulous place? She pouted in the direction of the storage room to Aunt Fong, who was chasing from outside. Lying on the rocking chair, it was very comfortable. No wonder son-in-law liked to lie on it before. There was a scream from the room. A figure rushed out of the room and crawled out of the yard. Aunt Fong hurriedly chased after him with the broom in her hand. In the yard next to Rui Square, several long tables were put together. On the table was a huge canvas. A woman in a humble dress with a wooden hairpin in her hair was holding a brush in her hand. The tip of the brush was moving on the canvas. The painting in front of her was more than half finished. The scenery was vivid. A tall tower stood on lonely mountain. Huge waves thousands of feet high swept from the front, as if they were going to drown the whole mountain. This was a scene from The Legend of the White Snake, which was the most popular play in recent days. It was called The Flooding of Jinshan. The mountain was so majestic that it looked like it was about to come out of the canvas. The water was so strong that it looked like it was going to surge out of the canvas. From afar, it was very shocking. Wan Ruoqing walked out of the room, shook her head, and said, "You can keep your composure. There are people out there who are willing to pay 3,000 taels of silver just to see you. Even a portrait can be sold for more than 100 taels of silver. Why do you work so hard for a few dozen copper coins? It's different." After standing for a long time, Xing Zumo twisted her sore waist and said, "I don't care. You promised to take me in anyway. You can't go back on your word now. Your fame has already spread out of Qing and prefecture. Everyone knows about the goddess of Luo Shui. The Song of a Beauty and the Ode of the Goddess of Luo have been passed around and copied by countless people. It is said that the price of the paper in Qing and prefecture is 10% higher than usual." Wan Ruoqing looked at her and teased. Who would have thought that the goddess of Jade Pool and goddess of Luo Shui, that everyone in Qing and prefecture knows about, is such a scoundrel? What goddess of Luo Shui? It's all his fault. A trace of embarrassment appeared on Xing Zumo's face. Every time she heard others recite these lines, she couldn't help but think of that night when she was honest with him. Once the Luotian Fu was released, her fame grew even greater than before. The matter of the #1 scholar of Qing and Fu composing a poem for a beauty also became a legend. As long as it was a woman, there was no one who did not envy her. Those poems would definitely be passed down. Whenever it was mentioned in the future, Xing Zumo's name would also appear. She had truly become famous throughout the ages, but she just wanted to live a peaceful life in the future. After this incident, this wish became an extravagant hope. She had to cover her face even when she went out, afraid of being recognized. How could there be a peaceful life? As for the culprit who caused all of this, he didn't know where he was currently enjoying himself. If you don't like it, you might as well give me that book of poems. Wan Ruoqing looked at her and said with a smile, "I'm afraid you can't bear to part with it. Without that book of poems, our goddess of Luo Shui won't have something to hold and smile at every night. And you're talking about me. I don't know who it is that has to take out that sky lamp to look at every 2 days." Xing Zumo's pretty face blushed slightly, but she didn't lose out at all. An imperceptible trace of envy appeared in Wan Ruoqing's eyes. She changed the topic and said, "The top 10 courtesans of Upper Yuan Night have already been selected. Don't you want to know who the courtesans are this year? Who else can it be? It's just that the battle for the first place is a little more intense, but it's just a competition between Lu Qiao and Lu Yi. Lu Yi wants to surpass Lu Qiao, who has the support of Qing and scholar, with just a few businessmen. I'm afraid it won't be so easy for her to get the first place. As for the others, it's probably those old faces." Xing Zumo added a few more strokes on the canvas and said indifferently. Wan Ruoqing nodded and said, "Indeed, Lu Yi lost to Lu Qiao by a small margin in the end, and could only settle for second place. In addition to the two of them, there are 4 other courtesans who are still famous. The Jade Courtyard lost you and gained Chen Miao Miao. Although it's only the last place, with your fame, the Jade Courtyard won't have any big loss this time. There was a sentence that Wan Ruoqing didn't say. Although Lu Xiaoqiao was this year's champion, in terms of popularity, she was far less than Xing Zumo. If she didn't redeem herself, even if she didn't do anything, she could still firmly take the position of champion. There was a knock on the door behind her. Wan Ruoqing walked over and opened the door. When she saw the person, she couldn't help but be slightly stunned. Xing Zumo, why do you have to do this? A voice containing too many emotions suddenly sounded. The Jade Courtyard's madam ran into the courtyard. Looking at Xing Zumo, who was dressed in plain clothes and didn't even have a decent piece of jewelry on her, tears fell down. Mom, why are you here? Xing Zumo was shocked. She looked back and only breathed a sigh of relief when she found that no one had followed her. The madam grabbed her hand and said excitedly, Xing Zumo, come back with me. What's wrong with the Jade Courtyard? There's good food and drinks. Even if we have to serve you like an ancestor, it's fine. You're already living a life of happiness, why do you have to suffer like this? Looking at the madam's tearful and distressed expression, Xing Zumo was a bit amused and said, Mom, you don't need to persuade me. Since I'm out, I won't go back. Oh, right, remember to pick tender ginger in the future. Old ginger is too stinging, you can't stand it. The method of using old ginger to make people cry was taught to her by her mother. She wanted to use this method to gain sympathy, but she used the wrong person. Hearing her words, the madam wiped away her tears and sighed, Sigh, you heartless woman. I didn't provide you with good food or good drink. Now that you've grown up, the Jade's Courtyard can't accommodate the goddess of Luo Shui anymore. You really don't plan to go back. After complaining for a while, the madam asked tentatively for the last time. I'm not going back. Xing Zumo smiled and said with absolute certainty. A trace of annoyance appeared on the madam's face. She turned and walked out, saying as she walked, All right, the child has grown up, I can't keep her anymore. I just hope you don't forget the sisters in the courtyard. If there's a chance, support them more, and that will be your repayment to me. This time, she didn't expect to invite Xing Zumo back. Although she was no longer in the Jade Courtyard, because of her great rise in fame, the Jade Courtyard's reputation also spread. These days, business was very good. If she hadn't been so heartless before and turned to support Chen Miao Miao, even if she couldn't invite her back, she would still be able to get more benefits. But now, she could only hope that Xing Zumo would remember the past and help the girls in the building, which was also helping her in disguise. Finally out. Seeing the madam's figure disappear, Xing Zumo's heart relaxed for no reason. Finally here. Looking at the city walls that were much taller and more majestic than Qing and Prefecture City, Li Yi let out a long breath and relaxed. Chapter 305. Of course, Li Yi wasn't the only one who relaxed. When they reached the foot of the city, the 11 guards nimbly dismounted. After traveling back and forth for half a month, they finally returned to the capital. Lu Rui jumped down from the carriage and looked at the most prosperous city in the Jing Kingdom. Outside the city gates, there were people weaving in and out, and there was an endless stream of carriages and horses. It was far more prosperous than Qing and Prefecture. Was this the capital? Behind her, the guards looked at her with respect. During the journey, no one dared to look at her as a weak girl. The young master really had the foresight to bring a girl like this along. Just as they were facing dozens of bandits as if they were facing a great enemy, they only saw the light of a sword flash and a white shadow weave through the crowd of bandits. In a moment, all the bandits could only lie on the ground and wail. Those with power were always respected by others. Even though she was a girl, these proud guards were willing to lower their heads. Elderly ordered, Li Zheng, send 2 people back to the mansion first and tell the news of the young master's return. A moment later, 2 people handed their horses over to their companions and galloped into the city. Galloping on horseback was not allowed in the city, so galloping was much faster. "Young master, let's go," Elder Li said with a smile. Li nodded and re-entered the carriage. The carriage slowly moved forward. Through the gap, he looked at the green stone slabs that were moving backward. His heart was very calm. As they neared the capital, the strange feeling in his heart gradually dissipated. It wouldn't be long before it completely disappeared. This made Li Yi feel that this trip was not in vain. On the way, Uncle Li had already told him everything about the current situation of the Li family. The old master of the Li family had made great contributions during the founding of the kingdom. He was promoted to a county magistrate and established the original foundation for the Li family. Decades ago, the Li family was considered prominent in the capital. However, with the passing of the old master, the descendants of the Li family did not make enough contributions to maintain their titles. The titles were reduced from generation to generation until the old master passed away. The Li family gradually declined until they were almost kicked out of the ranks of nobles. As the eldest son of the direct line of descent, Li Yi's father was supposed to inherit the Li family's business. However, for a woman, he gave up everything and left for a faraway place. After the previous head of the family passed away, the heir to the title could only be the second son of the direct line of descent. Thus, the title became a county magistrate. Of course, other than the title, he also had an official position in the court. He was the pillar of the Li family. The carriage slowly entered the city. The green stone paved street was at least twice the size of the main street of Qing and Manor. Even so, the street was slightly crowded. There was an endless stream of people and carriages. After the carriage traveled for about 15 minutes, the number of people on the road gradually decreased. The houses on both sides of the street became more and more imposing. Uncle Li shouted excitedly, "We're here." The carriage stopped. Li Yi and Lu Rui disembarked. "Young master, the old madam is already waiting in the inner hall. Let's go quickly." The guard who had left earlier walked out of the crowd and said, "Young master, come with me. We'll go see the old madam first." Uncle Li walked over and said, "Young master, come with me. We'll go see the old madam first." Li Yi was a junior, so he naturally couldn't let the elders welcome him at the door. Under the confused and curious gazes of the servants, he stepped into the Li family's front door. Although the Li family had declined, the house was still imposing. Li Yi didn't know how many corridors and moon doors they passed through before they arrived in front of a spacious hall. Before they entered the hall, a trembling figure walked out of the house with the help of a walking stick. "My poor child." The old madam with a face full of wrinkles and white hair shook off the support of the servant girls and walked unsteadily to Li Yi. She held his hand as tears streamed down her face. Li Yi didn't know what to do with this sudden scene. He could only let the old madam hold him. Seeing her crying tears of joy, Li Yi sighed softly and said with difficulty, "Grandmother, I'm back." The old madam didn't hide her emotions at all. It made Li Yi think of the old madam in another world. His heart couldn't help but be moved. "It's good that you're back, it's good that you're back." The old madam used her sleeve to wipe away the tears on her face. She looked up and down at Li Yi and murmured, "It can't be wrong, it can't be wrong. He's practically carved out of the same mold as Ming Han. He's a child of my Li family." As if remembering something sad, the old madam's mood became low again. My poor child Ming Han. In Li Yi's memory, he hadn't seen the father of the original owner of his body mention anything about the family. However, every year during the Double Yang festival, he would get drunk and say things like, "Mother, I'm unfilial. I've let you down," with tears streaming down his face. It could be seen how important the old madam was in his heart. Along the way, he learned from Uncle Li that the old madam loved her eldest son the most. In the past 20 years, she often cried late at night and became ill from worry. Her health had always been poor. Suddenly, the old madam seemed to notice something. She suddenly looked at Lu Rui, who was standing beside Li Yi. Her eyes lit up and she let go of Li Yi. She hurriedly walked over and held her hand. "Is this my granddaughter-in-law? You're so pretty. My grandson has good taste. Come, let grandmother take a good look." Hearing the old madam say granddaughter-in-law, the guard named Li Zheng's expression changed drastically. A few days ago, he was dragged by the collar and thrown out of the courtyard by this heroine because he called her second madam. Even now, his butt was still aching. If the old madam was thrown out, she would lose her life. However, the scene that he was worried about did not happen. The old madam held Lu Rui's hand. The more she looked at her, the more satisfied she was. The wrinkles on her face smoothed out. She took off a bracelet from her wrist and said, "This is the first time I'm meeting my granddaughter-in-law. I don't have anything good to give you. Take this bracelet. From now on, you're a member of the Li family." Mississippi Lu, who was always fearless and could even poke a hole in the sky when she was angry, seemed to be at a loss. She looked at Li Yi with a pleading gaze. Li Yi could only walk over and explain, "Grandmother, the madam is not feeling well. She couldn't stand the fatigue of the long journey, so she didn't come with us. This is my wife's sister. Sisters are like a family. It's the same, it's the same." But the old madam didn't seem to hear Li Yi's words. She put the bracelet on Lu Rui's wrist with a smile. "What do you mean by it's the same?" Li Yi stood there in a daze. He was speechless for a moment. Uncle Li, who was standing at the side, watched the old madam put the bracelet on the wrist of the madam's second daughter. His eyes widened and his face was full of disbelief. This bracelet was put on by the old madam when she married the master. It had always been passed down to the first wife of the Li family. The second wife begged the old madam for decades, but the old madam didn't give it to her. Could it be that she was so happy at this moment that she forgot about it? Chapter 306. The Li family obviously had a tradition of valuing females over males. After seeing her precious granddaughter-in-law, old mistress completely forgot about the existence of Li Yi, her real grandson. She pulled Lu Rui's hand and walked into the house. Old mistress's enthusiasm far exceeded Li Yi's imagination. At this moment, he could only follow behind them. However, a few maidservants beside old mistress stole a glance at this young master whom they were meeting for the first time. After being discovered by Li Yi, they turned their heads away with blushing faces. There were quite a number of people in the hall. When old mistress pulled Lu Rui in, the crowd happened to come out to welcome them. "Good, good." A middle-aged man in his 30s strode over to Li Yi. He patted his shoulder hard and said a few words with a face full of good. Li Yi felt some pain in his shoulder, but when he saw the man's slightly red eyes, he didn't argue with him. "Young master, this is second master. You should call him second uncle," Uncle Li reminded him. There were 3 sons and 1 daughter in the direct line of descent in the Li family. The eldest son was not around, so the second son inherited the family business. This meant that the person in front of him was the master of the Li family, the uncle of the original owner of this body. "Second uncle," Li Yi bowed and greeted. Perhaps it was because they shared the same bloodline, even though it was the first time they met, he couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity with these people. "This is third master," Uncle Li said as he pointed to another younger man. Li Yi bowed again. This third uncle only nodded slightly and didn't appear to be very enthusiastic. Li Yi didn't mind this. Uncle Li had told him long ago that the third master of the Li family had a mild temper. He treated everyone like this and didn't have any ill intentions. There were second uncles and third uncles. Naturally, there were second aunts and third aunts. As long as one was born in a big family, which man did not have at least 1 or 2 concubines? Li Yi recognized a circle of people, but in the end, he only remembered the most important ones. Most of the womenfolk were circling around Rui. Li Yi saw a woman point at the bracelet that old mistress had just given her. She exclaimed with an exaggerated expression, "This bracelet looks so familiar. It looks like the one that old mistress is wearing." Then, everyone's eyes were glued to the bracelet on Lu Rui's wrist. Some were amazed, some were envious, and some were jealous. Li Yi immediately knew that old mistress might have given a big gift. These two children have been on the road for a few days. I'm sure they're exhausted. They've met everyone they need to meet. Let them go and have a good rest. If there's anything else, we'll talk about it at night. After a while, the old mistress issued an order. Out of all virtues, filial piety was the most important. The ancients had deeply implemented this traditional virtue. In this family, the men made the decisions for external matters. As for the domestic matters, old mistress was the one in charge. Rui, come with grandmother for a while. When Li Yi was escorted away by a few maidservants, he saw old mistress holding Mississippi Lu's hand and happily walking to the back hall. Although this was still a society that valued appearance, and it was easier to be liked by others if one was beautiful, Li Yi felt that the way old mistress looked at him was not quite normal. Just as he was feeling puzzled, he was brought into a room by a few maidservants. A pretty maidservant said crisply, "Young master, this servant will help you bathe. It had been a tiring journey and he was really tired. It would be nice to have a comfortable hot bath." Li Yi took off his outer robe and suddenly felt that something was wrong. He turned around and saw that a few maidservants were standing behind him, looking at him with red faces. There was clearly some kind of light in their eyes. Li Yi did not have the habit of being surrounded by people when he was bathing. He just wanted to have a good bath alone. After the bathtub and hot water were prepared, he sent them out. Lying comfortably in the bathtub, he began to miss Xiao Huan. At this time, if only he could have a little maidservant's hands massaging his shoulders. How good would it be? He had arrived at the capital, and the favor was almost repaid. When old mistress's birthday was over, he could say goodbye. Rui and Xiao Huan were still waiting for him at home. No matter how big the Li family's business was, it was not his turn to inherit it. Moreover, he was really not interested in it. Coming to visit the Li family was just the obsession of the child in his dream. Li Yi had a premonition that when he dreamed again, he would not be able to see him. Just as Li Yi was lying comfortably in the bathtub, a few maidservants sat in the corridor by the door and whispered, "That is the young master." It seems that the story of the young master running away from home 20 years ago is true. A maidservant with 2 buns exclaimed. A slightly older maidservant whispered, "Of course it is true. The elders in the manor all know that the young master ran away with a woman. Otherwise, how could the second master become the master? I heard from old mistress that the young master looks exactly like the young master. I don't know if it is true." A round-faced maidservant murmured. "It is true, it is true. There is a portrait of the young master in old mistress's temple. I have seen it before. The person in the portrait is very similar to the young master. Old mistress always cries when she looks at the portrait. It should be the young master. The young master is really handsome. Although he looks thin, when he takes off his clothes, he is really well built. Say, who do you think old mistress will send to serve the young master?" In these large families, the maidservants who served the young master would usually become concubines. Although it was not to say that they would fly up the branches and become phoenixes, they would be able to live a life of luxury. Therefore, becoming the young master's maidservant was the dream of most maidservants. Hearing this, one of them sneered, "Stop dreaming. I think the young master doesn't have any feelings for us at all. Otherwise, he wouldn't have driven us all out just now. Even young mistress's second daughter is so beautiful. I think young mistress is also a first-class beauty. Will the young master like us? The maidservant who spoke just now was obviously disappointed. She changed the topic and said, old mistress likes the second daughter very much. She even gave the jade bracelet on her hand to her. I heard that the jade bracelet is only passed down to the first wife of the Lee family. Second mistress has always wanted the jade bracelet, but old mistress never gave it to her. This time, second mistress will definitely be unhappy. When they had nothing to do, they would secretly gossip about their masters. It was probably one of the few entertainment for these servants. Especially when there was no one around, the topic would also be bolder. At this time, in a hall at the back of the house, an angry woman pointed at Li Mingzi, the current head of the Li family, and said, look, how biased she is. Can that bracelet be given away so casually? Does she want that outsider woman to be the first wife of the Li family? I knew it. After so many years, the old lady is still thinking about her eldest son. She keeps calling him good grandson. Does she still care about us? She can give away the family heirloom bracelets today, and she can give away the Li family tomorrow. Shut up. Li Mingzi suddenly pounded the table, stood up and said, he is the only blood of my eldest brother. He is a descendant of the Li family. I owe my eldest brother too much. I can't treat this child badly. Don't say these words again. After that, he directly flicked his sleeves and left, leaving only the woman in the hall, cursing even louder. As soon as Li Yi woke up, he felt refreshed. It was rare that he didn't have any dreams recently. He raised his head and looked out of the window, finding that it was already dark. Young master, old mistress asked me to take you to dinner. After knocking on the door, a clear and crisp voice was heard. Chapter 307. The Li family was really big. More importantly, the roads were all twisted and turned, and there were moon doors one after another. Li Yi was not very good at recognizing the roads. After a simple wash of his face, he was still led by a young servant girl through the house. A big family was a big family. They even had a specific place to eat. They were not like those from small villages. Wherever there was a place to squat, that was the dining hall. Just as he walked through the door, a beautiful woman in her early 30s walked over. She pulled his hand and looked him up and down. You really are Big Brother's child. You look exactly like Big Brother when he was young. The women of the Li family had the habit of holding people's hands when they met. When they were in the mood, they might even rub their faces a few times. Li Yi's face was almost deformed by the beautiful woman's pulling, but he still forced a smile and said, You must be Auntie. Your nephew greets Auntie. The old madam had 3 sons and 1 daughter. Based on the way she addressed him, Li Yi quickly determined the identity of the beautiful woman in front of him. The old madam's youngest daughter was also his aunt in name. Good child, come and sit. You must be tired from the journey. The women of the Li family were also very friendly. He had been in this world for more than half a year, but this was the first time Li Yi felt like he was being welcomed by everyone. It was like he had returned home after a long journey. Of course, being touched was one thing. He knew very well that his home was in Qing and Fu, not in the capital. He was pulled by the beautiful woman to sit next to the old madam. Opposite him was Mississippi Lu, who had changed into a new set of clothes. On her wrist was a jade bracelet given to her by the old mistress, and the hairpins on her head were replaced with a pair that she had never seen before. She just sat there quietly, and the butterfly wings on the hairpins fluttered slowly. One look and one could tell that it was worth a lot of money. The sword that never left her side was nowhere to be found. After not seeing her for a while, she had changed from a peerless heroine to a lady of a noble family. Needless to say, this must be the credit of the old mistress. Only the old grandma's family was eating with them, and they controlled the core power of the Li family. Besides second uncle and third uncle's family that he had met in the morning, there was also this aunt who kept asking questions. At the end of the table, a child stared at Li Yi with wide eyes. He was very curious that this stranger he had never seen before could sit next to the old grandma. It was said that in a wealthy family, one should not talk while eating. This was the most basic rule, but Li Yi found that this rule did not apply to the Li family. The beautiful woman beside him kept asking him questions, and even the old grandma would occasionally add a few words. Of course, most of the questions were about his life these years, but most of them were about the father that he had never met. Fortunately, the strange dreams he had these days were probably the memories hidden in the depths of this body. It was easy for him to answer. He was only telling the truth, but the old grandma and the beautiful woman listened with tears in their eyes. Your father has never told you about the Li family. The old grandma rubbed her eyes and asked without batting an eyelid. Li Yi shook his head. This was the truth. Ever since he was young, no one had said a word to him about the Li family in the capital. The old grandma sighed and said sadly, that year, in order to separate them, the old master almost caused your mother's death. He still hates us. Li Yi did not know that there was such a thing. No wonder in his memory, his father was always brooding over his mother's death. It seemed that the reason he did not want to talk about the Li family was mostly because of this. Not wanting the old grandma to be too sad, the beautiful woman quickly changed the topic and asked, I heard from Butler Li that little Yi, is now a county lieutenant, and it was personally conferred by the emperor. With regards to this form of address, Li Yi could not react for a moment. Mississippi Lu, who was sitting opposite him, almost spat out the soup in her mouth. She patted her chest and looked at Li Yi with a mocking gaze. It is the emperor's favor. Li Yi could only nod his head and say, Since you have received the emperor's favor, you should be more diligent. You have passed the imperial examinations at such a young age, which shows that you are very talented. Why did you not participate in the imperial examinations these past few years? The middle-aged man sitting opposite the beautiful woman put down his chopsticks and looked at Li Yi. Without waiting for Li Yi to answer, he spoke again, any officials of the 7th rank and above will be promoted to the imperial scholar rank. Although you have received the emperor's favor, you should also study hard and strive to become an imperial scholar as soon as possible. The moment he opened his mouth, it was as if he was admonishing Li Yi. The emperor's favor was vast, and it was often vast. Perhaps just because of a poem or an article, if it caught the emperor's eye, one could be promoted to an official position. As the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Li Mingze had seen many of these things. Every year, if not 100, there would be at least 80. Although he was curious as to what Li Yi had done to earn the emperor's praise, he was not too surprised. No matter what, he was considered the most promising one among the younger generation of the Li family. Thinking about the situation of the younger generation of the Li family, he looked at the two people sitting below him and said, Ingjie, Inkai, the two of you should also learn from your elder brother. Inkai should listen to the teacher's teachings, don't just think about playing around all day. As for Ingjie, you will be married in a few months, don't go to the red light district anymore. Li Mingze no longer had any hope for his son. He planned to help him find an official position in the future so that he could live a stable life. Even if the Li family lost their nobility in a few decades, after so many years of business, they would not fall into a situation where they could be bullied. After Li Mingze finished speaking, a young man at the end of the table nodded his head. He felt as if he had been shot in the chest by an arrow. However, even if you gave him 10 guts, he would not dare to refute his father's words. As for the young man who was quickly shoveling food into his mouth with a wooden spoon, he only shook his round head. He was most afraid of this second uncle of his. Whatever second uncle said, he would do. Hurry up and finish eating. It was time to dig out the bird's nest in the tree in the yard. Fortunately, Li Yi was already immune to this kind of words. He even had to thank Professor Fong. He smiled and said that he would definitely study hard. In his heart, he thought that there were still 7 days until the old mistress's birthday. He wanted to have some time to experience the local customs of the capital. Then, he packed his luggage and rushed home. He heard that if he took a boat from the capital, he would arrive at Qing and Prefecture in less than 2 days, leaving the White Emperor in the morning among the colorful clouds. 1,000 miles of Jiangling returned in a day. This should be a scene like this, right? The meal was very harmonious. From the bits and pieces of conversation, Li Yi had a deeper understanding of the current Li family. In the capital, the political center of the Jing kingdom, a viscount was indeed not much. A random brick thrown on the street could kill 2 people. However, those families that were once prominent all had some history and would not decline so easily. This second uncle of his, other than being a viscount, was also an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. He could be considered a high-ranking official in the court. At his age, it was very likely that he would advance further in his lifetime. As long as he did not commit any political crimes, he could at least ensure the safety of the Li family for decades. In this kind of Li family, it did not matter much whether he was there or not. It was uncomfortable to be controlled by others in everything. It was better to return to the small Qing and Prefecture and live life with Rui in that small courtyard. After sending away the servant girl arranged by the old mistress, he sat in the courtyard assigned to him. The moon on the 16th of the first month was quite round, but there were only a few stars. In the capital, that idiot Li Xian's wedding should have already ended. He did not know if he had returned or not. Her Royal Highness would probably not be able to dress up as a constable and parade around the city, little Yi. As Li Yi was thinking about this, a strange voice came from the top of the wall. Chapter 308. The Li family in the capital didn't have such a treasure as a rocking chair. Li Yi leaned on the small chair and looked at the white shadow standing on the wall. He said lazily, "Little thing, is that your childhood nickname? Why haven't I heard Rui mention it before?" Rui was stunned for a moment. Then she realized that this nickname seemed to be suitable for her. She wanted to make fun of Li Yi, but she didn't expect that she would get herself into trouble. There was a trace of annoyance on her pretty face. She threw away the servant girl who was anxiously shouting for her to come down and jumped down from the wall. "When are you going back?" She walked to Li Yi and said coldly with her sword in her arms. The impolite Mississippi Lu almost never called him brother-in-law. Li Yi was already used to it. Maybe since that day when she rode on the horse and looked at him as if he was a prey and said, "Take him away," she never planned to be a well-behaved sister-in-law. "We'll leave after my birthday. If we take the boat, it will only take 2 days. Lu Rui secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She didn't ask more and changed the topic. "Madam is going to the temple outside the city to burn incense tomorrow. I'll go with her. Do you want to go?" "No." Li Yi shook his head and said decisively. "Forget it." Mississippi Lu said coldly. She tiptoed and flew to the top of the wall. The servant girl opposite her screamed again. Li Yi looked at the courtyard next door. Mississippi Lu was just 17 years old. She was just a child. Although she always pretended to be cold and mature, the nature of a young girl couldn't be changed. Rui had always protected her and the little environmental protector very well. Although Rui was good at martial arts, her mind was rarely pure. Under her cold appearance, there was a lively playful heart. Rui knew that she didn't want to get too involved with the Li family, so she didn't come with him. Instead, she asked Rui to go with him. One reason was to protect her, and the other was to let her go out and relax. Thinking of her character, Li Yi couldn't help but worry about Rui's future. Although it was the beginning of spring after the spring festival, the weather started to warm up. People still had to wait until the Upper Yuan dynasty to feel the spring. The wind was gentle, the air was clear, and the sun was bright. The snow on the mountain had long melted. Today was a good day for traveling. Every year on the 17th day of the first lunar month, the cold mountain temple outside the city would hold a temple fair. Every time at this time, believers from all over the world would go up the mountain to worship. Scholars would offer some incense, praying that they would be able to graduate in the coming year. At that time, they would definitely give the Buddha a golden body. Young ladies hoped to find their Mr. Right as soon as possible. Newlyweds often went to pray to the goddess of mercy. In a feudal society, it was normal for the people to be a bit feudal. Without science, they had to believe in something. Today, the old lady was also going to the cold mountain temple to fulfill her vow. She was accompanied by a large group of maids, a dozen guards, and a heroine with superb martial arts skills. As for Li Yi, he was just going out for a walk out of boredom. The cold mountain temple was naturally on Cold Mountain. It had nothing to do with the cold mountain temple, which was the cold mountain temple outside the city of Gusu, where the bell rings at midnight on the passenger ships. It was a short mountain no more than 100 meters above sea level. Because of the cold mountain temple, it became famous. Li Yi sat in the carriage. After leaving the city, the journey began to be bumpy. He was not the only one in the carriage. The chubby brat was chewing on a juicy chicken leg, completely ignoring Li Yi. To the brat, this chicken leg was much more interesting than this elder brother who had appeared out of nowhere. If Li Yi remembered correctly, the brat in front of him was called Li Yingkai. He was the son of third uncle Li Mingyuan. This time, he had been dragged out of the house by his mother. A chicken leg was in his hands, but after a while, only a few bones were left. There was not a trace of meat left on the bones. This showed that this brat was an expert at eating chicken legs. It wasn't until he sucked all 10 of his fingers and took out a few pieces of preserved fruit to stuff into his mouth that Li Yi realized that there was a reason why this brat was so strong at such a young age. As if he felt a little embarrassed eating alone, the brat took out a piece of preserved fruit, looked at it longingly, and handed it to Li Yi. Li Yi had just seen him lick his hand like a bear's paw. Looking at the preserved fruit, he smiled and shook his head in refusal. The brat was clearly very happy. With a turn of his hand, he stuffed the preserved fruit into his own mouth. The cold mountain temple was not far. After traveling for about an hour, they arrived at the foot of Cold Mountain. The stone steps paved with bluestone extended all the way from the foot of the mountain to the summit. There were already quite a few people climbing up the stone steps. The old man's body was inconvenient, so the carriage took a flat mountain path. The brat had just eaten something, and had begun to fart non-stop in the carriage. Li Yi had no choice but to jump off the carriage and tell the driver that he planned to go up the mountain on foot. When the time came, they could meet up at the top of the mountain. The air outside was much fresher, and there was even a faint fragrance in the air. Li Yi noticed that there were many plum blossoms planted on both sides of the mountain path. In the last 2 days, the blossoms were in full bloom. Almost every young lady wearing a veil on their head had one, and the stone steps were covered in flower petals. Li Yi had not taken a few steps when he unexpectedly saw a blue-robed scholar plucking a plum blossom and inserting it into his hair. He had the bearing of a song scholar, a group of people who spoiled the scenery. A perfectly fine plum blossom had been broken into a mess, and they actually thought it was an elegant affair. Several people with flowers in their hair, who called themselves scholars, were reciting poems in front of a bare plum tree. The stone steps were not steep, but they were very long. It took Li Yi about a quarter of an hour to walk up the stone steps. When he arrived at the top of the mountain, he finally understood why he had met so many young masters and ladies along the way. The cold mountain temple was not a lonely temple. In fact, the entire mountain top was under the jurisdiction of the cold mountain temple, including the surrounding plum blossom forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. The young ladies with the veil toured the plum blossom forest. Low chants and light laughter could be heard from the vale. The scholars spread a plain cloth under the plum tree, sat cross-legged, raised their cups, and drank to their heart's content. When they recited a good poem, it began to rain plum blossoms. When the peach and apricot trees were still bare branches, this endless plum blossom forest was indeed a good place to go for an outing. No wonder the cold mountain temple chose to hold the temple fair today. This plum blossom forest would attract many scholars and beauties. After enjoying the plum blossom forest, they would go in to worship the Bodhisattva and Buddha. Naturally, they would also offer incense. These bald donkeys really knew how to pick the right time. Naturally, Li Yi was not in the mood to enjoy the plum blossom forest alone. 2 coachmen were guarding outside the temple. They said that the old mistress had brought everyone into the temple to offer incense and to visit a famous monk. They were afraid that they would not come out for a while. Deeply educated by Marxism-Leninism, Li Yi did not believe in Buddha in the past. However, since something as unimaginable as time travel could happen, what else was impossible? He respectfully lit a stick of incense and threw a piece of silver into the merit box. Then, he leisurely strolled around the temple. He did not like crowded places, so he chose quiet paths. The antique temple also had a unique charm. It was simple and dignified, which was something that the temples of later generations did not have. After passing through a few arched doors, the people gradually became sparse. When he walked out of the last moon door, a plum blossom forest that was even more flourishing than the outside appeared in front of him. "Why are you worried, almsgiver?" An old voice came from the plum blossom forest. "Life is full of unsatisfactory things. How can I not be worried?" The young man's voice continued. Li Yi stopped and a look of interest appeared on his face. He took a few steps forward and saw the backs of an old monk and a young man in the depths of the plum blossom forest. Hearing the young man's words, the old monk casually pointed at a plum tree and smiled without saying a word. Li Yi stood behind the two and watched the scene in a daze. Could this be the legendary Zen master and the young man? The young man was enlightened and murmured, "Master, do you mean that the plum blossoms have endured the bitter winter to have the fragrance they have today? The hardship is temporary, but as long as it is endured, it will bloom in spring." Li Yi really did not want to spoil a perfect joke. He laughed until he held his stomach and said, "No, what master means is, what are you talking about in front of the plum blossom?" "Who?" The young man suddenly turned his head and pointed at Li Yi, who was standing behind him. Just as he was about to speak, his mouth opened halfway. The expression on his face was as if he had seen a ghost. Li Yi laughed so hard that he could not straighten his back. He cupped his hands and said, "Sorry, I couldn't hold it in. Please continue, continue. It was not good to spoil other people's discussion of Zen." Li Yi planned to laugh again after he left. He did not look at the old monk and the young man's reaction. He guessed that they were still pondering the meaning of his words. He turned and walked in the direction he came from. Seeing Li Yi's reaction, a look of doubt appeared on the young man's face. Seeing that Li Yi was about to walk out, he hurriedly said, "Brother, please wait." Hearing the young man's words, Li Yi's footsteps sped up. He thought to himself that this guy did not want to continue discussing Zen with the old monk. Why did he come to me? Stop. Just as he was about to walk out of the moon door, 2 figures suddenly flashed in front of him and blocked his way. Seeing the 2 men standing in front of him, Li Yi was stunned. The expression on his face was also as if he had seen a ghost. Chapter 309. Looking at the 2 familiar faces in front of him, Li Yi was shocked. Why were Li Xian's guards here? These 2 were Li Xian's godlike followers. Generally speaking, wherever Li Xian appeared, there would be their shadows. Could it be that the slightly familiar voice he heard just now was, sure enough, when Li Yi thought of a certain possibility, an ecstatic face appeared in front of him. You've also come to the capital? There were 4 great joys in life: rain after a long drought, meeting an old friend in a foreign land, wedding night, and getting a place in the imperial examinations. For Li Xian, wedding night was not a happy event. As the crown prince of Ningguang, his status was noble. There was no need for him to get a place in the imperial examinations. Only meeting an old friend in a foreign land could be considered an extreme joy. I'm originally from the capital. Do you know me, brother? Seeing the young man looking at him with a puzzled expression, Li Xian was a little stunned. After a closer look, he found that the other person's style of dressing was very different from before. In Li Yi's own words, he did not like to wear such showy clothes. His voice also seemed to be very different. Could it be that he had recognized the wrong person? Come to think of it, he had decisively rejected Mingzhu's invitation to come to the capital to become an official. 10 days ago, the two of them were still drinking and chatting merrily in the jadeite courtyard. Unless Li Yi set foot on the road to the capital as soon as he left Qing and prefecture, it would be impossible to see him here. But in this world, were there really 2 people who looked so similar? May I know this brother's name? I'm Li Yi. Li Yi cupped his hands in salute. An actor's self-cultivation, the basics of dramatic performance, an actor's learning manual. Li Yi, at this moment, felt like he was possessed by the best actor. If he worked hard, it was not impossible for him to win an Oscar. As for changing one's voice, the art of changing one's appearance and voice was an essential skill in the martial arts world. With just a little bit of skill, one could become a qualified voice actress. Li Xian no longer doubted his identity. After all, if it was really Li Yi, it was impossible for him not to recognize him. At this moment, he began to be interested in this person called Li Ming. Their appearances were more than 90% similar, and they were both surnamed Li. If it was said that the two of them didn't have any relationship, he wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. Could it be that this person called Li Ming was Li Yi's twin brother? Li Xian, who thought he had discovered a great secret, immediately forgot all his worries and asked curiously, "Do you know someone called Li Yi? He looks almost exactly like you. Are you from Qing and prefecture and know my elder brother?" The young man looked at him with surprise. "Haha, I know, of course I know." Li Xian laughed and said, "I really didn't think that Li Yi would actually have a younger brother that looks exactly like him. This is so fun." Li Yi sighed in his heart. With Li Xian's intelligence, to be able to live peacefully until he was 20 years old, he must have accumulated a lot of good karma in his previous life. He didn't plan to reveal his identity now. Before he realized it, he could still have 2 days of leisure. At this moment, a guard walked over and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince's consort is coming." Li Yi turned around and saw a group of people walking over. I'm afraid I won't have the chance today." "Li Ming, right? When I'm free, I'll find you for a drink." Li Xian laughed and strode forward. As long as he knew his name, investigating him was a very easy matter. The Crown Prince's consort. He saw a group of maids surrounding a woman with a curtain as she walked over. The woman's figure was not bad, but as for what she looked like, it was covered by a layer of white gauze, so he couldn't see it clearly. Li Xian hadn't been in the capital for long. It seemed that his marriage had only happened a few days ago. It was said that his Crown Prince's consort was the legitimate daughter of a wealthy family in the Jing Kingdom. Her status was incomparably noble, and she was also an outstanding beauty. However, the two of them didn't stick together all day long during their honeymoon period. Li Xian, this fellow, was discussing the problem of worry with the old monk. Could it be that the couple's life was not harmonious? If that was the case, finding the old monk would be useless. He should go find an old Chinese doctor. "Husband, have you seen Grandmaster Sandalwood Yin?" Li Xian walked over with a smile on his face, and a light voice came from the veil. Li Xian nodded and said, Great Master Tan Yin is well versed in Buddhism and is worthy of being an enlightened monk. I have benefited a lot from talking with the Great Master. Husband's complexion is very good. I presume that the Great Master has already dispelled husband's doubts. Ling Long, before you leave, double the amount of incense in the temple. The woman's voice was soft. A maid beside her immediately nodded in agreement. Since you finished offering incense and paying respects to the Buddha, let's return early. After saying this, Li Xian walked forward with large strides. The lips of the woman in the curtain moved, but in the end, she didn't say the words of appreciating the plum blossoms together. She let out a long sigh and said, Let's go. The luxurious carriage slowly descended along the mountain path. Dozens of guards surrounded the carriage. Inside the carriage, the woman who had already taken off the curtain sat upright on the brocade couch. She looked out the window at the young man who would rather ride a horse than ride in the same carriage as her. Her eyes were slightly lowered, and her fair hands tightly gripped the hem of her dress. I wonder what expression Mingzu would have if she knew that Li Yi has a brother who looks exactly like him. Li Xian rode on the horse with a strange smile on his face. Your Highness. A guard rode a horse and whispered as he caught up to him. What is it? Li Xian turned to look at him. Just now at Cold Mountain Temple. The guard hesitated for a moment and said, I think I saw Miss Rui. Miss Rui. Li Xian raised his brows. Which Miss Rui? Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he pulled on the reins of the horse and asked, Are you talking about Mississippi Lu? Maybe I saw wrongly. Maybe they just look alike, the guard said after thinking for a moment. It was a coincidence if it happened once, but it was inevitable if it happened twice. An excited expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He pointed at a few people and said, The few of you, follow me up the mountain. The rest of you, escort the crown princess back to the residence. A few clouds of dust disappeared from the mountain path. Inside the carriage, the woman revealed a disappointed expression. She put down the curtain and said, Let's go. Li Yi was looking at the old monk in front of him with a vigilant expression. In just the blink of an eye, the old monk had appeared in front of him. It was enough to show that the old monk was an expert. At the very least, he couldn't beat him. When I pointed at the plum tree just now, I meant to say that a moment of suffering is nothing and that there will be a day of happiness after suffering, just like what the benefactor said. The old monk looked at Li Yi with a smile and asked, Young benefactor, how could you have such a misunderstanding? Li Yi understood that the old monk might be unhappy with his interruption just now. This was not a joke on the internet in the future, but a real Zen master. When facing a real Zen master, he naturally couldn't just casually make up a joke to deal with it. Li Yi's expression turned serious and then he smiled mysteriously. He looked at the old monk and said, The Buddha said, It can't be said, it can't be said. After saying that, he elegantly turned around and strode back in the direction from where he came. The old monk was stunned on the spot. After a long time, a smile appeared on his old face. He looked at the direction in which Li Yi left and said, All appearances are fabricated. Worry is also empty, and worry is also empty. I was too obsessed with appearances. Young benefactor, you have great wisdom. Chapter 310. He pulled out a line in Buddhist language that he had heard from somewhere, and he didn't know if it was Buddhist language or not. In any case, that line, which he didn't understand but felt awesome, had frightened the old monk. Taking advantage of the fact that he hadn't recovered his wits, he hurriedly ran away. Who knew whether or not he would use the 1,000-leaf palm of great compassion and great compassion to strike him when he woke up? Cold Mountain Temple was not small, with innumerable halls and pavilions. The old madam seemed to be listening to some famous monk preach the scriptures. For a moment, he didn't know where Rui and the others had gone, so Li Yi decided to just stroll around the temple. The temple fair would last for 3 days. In these 3 days, there was an endless stream of visitors to Cold Mountain. There were believers who came to pray to Buddha and burn incense, as well as young men and women who came solely to admire the plum blossoms. The sharp-witted peddlers had long since grasped this opportunity and had long since found a spot at the top of the mountain, selling little trinkets like combs, wooden tablets, and so on. They claimed that these items were treasures that had been consecrated by the high monks of Cold Mountain Temple. 10 copper coins couldn't buy them, 10 copper coins couldn't buy them, and 10 copper coins naturally couldn't buy a comb either. Treasures personally consecrated by the high monks were not for sale for less than 1 copper coin. In addition, there was naturally no lack of people selling food. On a plaza far away from the plum blossom forest, a space had been cleared out. Peddlers carrying poles stood next to each other, loudly shouting, steamed buns, and noodles. They were not allowed to go to the plum blossom forest, saying that it would spoil the mood of those nobles. Any young master or young lady there was not someone they could afford to offend. A chubby boy dressed in embroidered clothes ran out of the plum blossom forest, huffing and puffing. He threw down a handful of silver, and in a short while, he ran into the forest with a large pile of food. Under a plum tree, a little girl of about 7 or 8 raised her head in anticipation. "Little Candy, eat." The chubby boy ran over, panting heavily, and placed all the things he had bought on the white cloth on the ground. "Thank you, big brother," the little girl said sweetly. She first picked up a piece of candied plum and gave it to the chubby boy, then she sat down and began to eat. There were quite a few children of this age in the forest. They came out with their families, so it was impossible for them to quietly chant sutras and worship Buddha with the adults. In order to prevent them from making noise in the temple, most families would let their servants watch over them and let them play by themselves in the plum blossom forest. At this moment, there were a few servants standing behind the 2 children. Seeing the 2 young masters eating quietly, they began to chat. "Hey, Fatty Lee, you are here too." A few youths dressed in embroidered clothes quickly surrounded them as if they had discovered a new continent. The little fatty's expression changed at first, then he puffed out his chest and said, "Chen Xiaotian, I don't want to fight with you today. Why are you eating every time I see you? I think you might as well not call yourself Li Yingkai, call yourself Pig Li instead." The few of them clearly had enmity with each other. The youth in embroidered clothes looked at the things on the white cloth and sneered, "Sure enough, it's Fat Pig Li. I'm afraid only pigs would eat these things." "Big brother." The little girl nervously grabbed onto the corner of the little fatty's clothes. "Pig Li, is this your sister? I thought everyone in your family was as fat as you." The youth in embroidered clothes laughed out loud. He suddenly ran over and fiercely stepped on the food on the white cloth. He pulled the little girl's face and pointed to the ground, saying, "This is the real pig's feed." How could a child bear such humiliation? The little fatty only felt his blood rushing to his head, and he punched the chest of the youth in embroidered clothes. "You dare to make a move, hit him." The youth in embroidered clothes seemed to be waiting for this moment. After avoiding the punch, he immediately shouted. Several youths behind him immediately swarmed up and pressed the little fatty to the ground. The little girl on the side was so scared that she cried out. The faces of several servants changed. Just as they were about to come over and pull them away, they were blocked by a few people who had been following behind the youth in embroidered clothes. There were many figures in the plum forest. Many people saw the scene here. Seeing that it was just a few children playing, they didn't take it to heart. "Hey, Fatty Lee, as long as you call me Grandpa, I'll let you go. How about it?" The youth in embroidered clothes squatted down and patted the little fatty's face. "Call you Grandpa." The little fatty had the advantage in size. He suddenly turned over and broke free from the few youths behind him. With a tiger pounce, he pressed the youth in embroidered clothes under his body. Only when I'm full will I have the strength to beat you. With a loud shout, he clenched his fist and punched the youth in embroidered clothes. In the end, his fist didn't land on the face of the youth in embroidered robes. A young man grabbed his arm from behind and threw him to the side. He helped the pale-faced youth in embroidered robes up and said in a flattering manner, "Young master, are you all right?" Many people around frowned. A few children playing was nothing, but this young man attacking a child was a bit too much. "Catch him for me." Just now he was almost beaten by Li Yingkai. The youth in embroidered clothes had a pale face. He was so angry that he stomped his feet and said to the young man, "Stop." The few servants of the little fatty were firmly blocked and could not rush over. They could only shout anxiously. Looking at the man walking towards him, the little fatty rubbed his bruised wrist and stood up with the help of a tree. He stared at the man with an unyielding expression. Who are they? How can they be so domineering in the cold mountain temple? Someone around asked doubtfully. Lower your voice. That is the young master of Duke Chen's family. The little fatty is called Li Yingkai. He should be the younger generation of assistant minister Li of the Ministry of Personnel. No wonder. These two families have been feuding for more than 10 years. However, it is a bit too shameless for a man to attack a child. That should be High Duke Chen's bodyguards. Little fatty only has a few servants who don't know martial arts. He's definitely going to suffer this time. However, it's just a joke between the younger generation. It won't be a big deal. Originally, there were a few people who disliked the man's behavior. After hearing that he was from Duke Chen's family, they immediately stopped talking. For most people, these words still carried a lot of weight. The little fatty gritted his teeth. When he saw the man's hand reach over, he was about to rush over. However, a hand reached out from behind him and grabbed the man's wrist. With a gentle shake, the man fell to the ground holding his arm and could not get up. At the same time, he felt someone pat him on the shoulder and a voice came from behind him. If you are being bullied, fight back yourself. The little fatty turned around and looked at the familiar figure. After a moment of shock, he shouted and rushed towards the youth in embroidered robes. The youth in embroidered robes wanted to run, but his reaction was a beat too slow. Soon, he was once again pounced on by the little fatty. The surrounding youths quickly rushed over to help, but they were unable to stop the little fatty's fist from landing on the youth in embroidered robes' face. The faces of the men blocking the little fatty's servants changed. Just as they were about to step forward, they saw the young man walking towards them. Let the children deal with their own matters. We should not interfere, get out of my way. One of the men said impatiently. Just as he was about to walk past the young man, his body flew backwards in the next moment. So, there is no room for discussion. The young man looked at the men who were looking at him warily and the smile on his face disappeared. Chapter 3:11. Just now, Li Yi's view of this little fatty who was always thinking about eating changed. He knew that he was no match for him, but he was still unyielding. When fighting, he still remembered to protect the little girl behind him. It was hard to tell that this little fatty, who was a little hot-blooded, was actually the son of his third uncle, who was always indifferent no matter what happened. Even if the world was destroyed, it would have nothing to do with him. The grudges between children should be solved by them in their own way. It was fair no matter who won or lost. There was no need for these lackeys to intervene. You're courting death. Seeing that the young man kicked one of their people away, the remaining 4 guards were immediately furious. One of them went around to help the young man in embroidered clothes, while the other 3 surrounded Li Yi. The 2 people that were dealt with just now, one was a trick, and the other was a surprise attack. Among the remaining 3, one of them gave him a little pressure. Even if he could deal with them, he would not feel good. At the very least, he would have to take a few punches and kicks. Li Yi was not prepared to be beaten. He looked at the young man who was watching the show with his arms crossed and asked, "How long are you going to watch?" Bang! The man walking towards the little fatty was sent flying by Li Xian's bodyguard with a kick. Li Xian walked over with a playful look in his eyes. He looked at him and said, "I couldn't tell that Brother Li Ming actually had such skills." Li Yi looked puzzled. "You've seen my brother." Li Xian's footsteps paused, and the expression on his face began to become suspicious. "Who are you people? How dare you interfere in my business?" Seeing that one of their own people was sent flying, and this guy who came out of nowhere treated them as nothing, one of the three people, who was obviously a bit tough and irritable, said angrily. Even though the capital was full of nobles, the Qin public house could be considered as a giant. Except for the imperial family and a few families that couldn't be provoked, it was basically an existence that could do whatever it wanted. Don't look at this big man's rough appearance. He was able to stay close to the young master and protect him. He had never heard that the Li family had any powerful backing, not to mention that the people in front of him were very unfamiliar. They were not the families that they couldn't afford to offend, so what was there to worry about? "Your father." Li Yi looked at the man in surprise and gave him a thumbs up in his heart. Daring to call himself lousy in front of Prince Ning's crown prince, was this guy trying to rebel and become Prince Ning himself? The royal family cared a lot about their dignity. Being disrespectful to the emperor was a serious crime that could result in beheading. This person dared to call the emperor brother, so he was a good man with courage. Jing Ke could be considered as a courageous man, but in the end, he was chopped into pieces by Emperor Qin Shi Huang. There were so many courageous men on Mount Liang, but in the end, all of them were wiped out. Since the ancient times, all the courageous men were now dead. From this, it could be seen that hot-blooded men usually did not have a good ending. Not long after the man said the word lousy, he was slapped in the face by one of Li Xian's guards, causing him to spit out all his teeth. By the time the other two reacted, their shoulders had already been pressed down, and they couldn't move at all. Break their legs. The leader of Li Xian's guards made the decision on his own. Don't you dare. We are from the house of High Duke Qin. Both of their legs were about to be broken. If they didn't raise the flag now, it would be too late. Usually, when they bullied others, most of them would just give them a beating. Even when they were dealing with those insignificant lords, they wouldn't break their legs. This was an act that completely shed all pretense of cordiality. When the leader of the guards heard this, he turned and looked at Li Xian. In the next moment, he turned back and said to the guards, "Since they are from the house of High Duke Qin, just break one of their legs." In order not to disturb the atmosphere of people admiring the flowers, and to be a civilized person, the guards decided to drag them out of the peach forest and break their legs. At this time, the outcome of the fight with the little fatty had also been decided. It had to be said that when it came to fighting, the fatty had a natural advantage. The four youths had lived a luxurious life since they were young. They probably hadn't put in much effort to practice martial arts. They only used simple punches and kicks. If the strength was light, hitting the little fatty's body was like scratching an itch. However, if they were hit by the little fatty's fist, they could only squat on the ground and cry. There was no other outcome. In a short while, the four youths were all knocked to the ground. The little fatty crawled up from the ground and panted heavily. He patted the dust off his body, completely ignoring his bruised and swollen face. He looked down at the four defeated youths and said loudly, "Didn't you want to fight? Get up." If he pointed to the sky and shouted, "Who else?" He was afraid that he would be struck by lightning if he acted so pretentiously. Hearing this, the few youngsters in embroidered clothes crawled up from the ground and quickly ran out of sight. "This is..." Li Xian pointed at the little fatty who looked like the leader of the martial arts world. Li Yi shook his head and said, "We'll talk about this later." Young master. Only then did the servants have time to run over. When they saw the little fatty's sorry state, they were about to cry. I'm fine. The little fatty wiped his snot. Although his body was in great pain, his heart was sweeter than eating candied fruit. He ran to the little girl's side and held her hand, saying, "The delicious food is all dirty. Big brother will buy it for you later." A servant walked to Li Yi worriedly and said, "Young master, those are the sons of High Duke Chen's family. Young master beat them up. We're in big trouble." High Duke Chen. Li Yi looked at him and asked, if it wasn't for today's incident, would they have caused less trouble for the Li family? The servant was speechless for a moment. Young master's words seemed to make sense. The Chen and Li family had been at odds for more than 10 years. The Chen family had been intentionally or unintentionally suppressing the Li family for so many years. It could be said that the Chen family had a lot to do with the Li family's rapid decline. High Duke. There were only a few High Dukes in a country. The small Li family obviously couldn't afford to offend a first-class duke, but someone could. Li Yi turned to look at Li Xian and asked, "Can we afford to offend High Duke Qin?" Li Xian didn't seem to hear Li Yi's words. He looked at the little fatty, then looked at Li Yi and murmured, "Young master. Young master, when did you have a son like this?" It seemed like he could afford to offend them. Li Yi felt that this world was quite unfair. They both had the surname Li, but why was there such a big difference? When the Li family was at its peak, there was still a big gap between them and the Qin family. The two families could have been on good terms, but in the end, the daughter of the High Duke was abandoned. It was no different from a slap in the face to the Qin family. Since then, the two families became enemies, and they went down the road of love and hate. Even if Li Xian didn't appear today, he would still stand up for the little fatty. First, as a member of the Li family, he couldn't watch him get bullied by others. Second, the reason why the Qin and Li families were in such a situation today was entirely because of his stubborn father. Li Yi felt very wronged. He didn't do many bad things in his previous life. He just didn't dare to help an old lady who fell, picked up some money on the street, and casually spent it. He didn't offend anyone. He transmigrated peacefully, but he somehow got involved in the fight of the pugilistic world and family disputes. Whatever he did, there would be people who opposed him. Even if he didn't do anything, there would be people who wanted to step on him. Wasn't it good to live a good life? If he had transmigrated into Dazhuang and Dazhuang's body, there wouldn't have been so many messy things, right? It was only the second day he came to the capital, and he already offended a High Duke. Fortunately, he had that brother's godly assistance. With one sentence, he also dragged the royal family into the matter. Even if the servant's leg was broken, the Qin family probably wouldn't have the guts to find trouble with Li Xian. It was very likely that they would specially visit him to apologize. As for the Li family, it didn't matter if there were too many lice. After so many years of grudges, it didn't matter if there was another one. On the contrary, because of today's matter, if they wanted to find trouble with the Li family in the future, they might have to think twice. Li Yi felt that he was about to become a schemer. This damned society. In just half a year, a good young man of the 21st century had been forced into such a state. Feudalism was killing people. Just as Li Yi was sighing because of this, a group of people walked over from the entrance of the plum blossom forest in a grandiose manner. The ones walking in front were obviously the few youths with snot and tears running down their faces covered in bruises. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.